Can we do a quick audio check with our online members? Can you hear us?
I can now, Barrick. Thank you. This is Stan.
Thank you, Director.
Okay, I think we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. This is Maureen Kane. I am co-chair of the TCJJ with Tom Raines, who's also present. Thank you, working group members. Today is really the day we start all our work, and hopefully we'll get everyone talking about our mission and our goals and our mandate under the executive order. So, obviously we're in a room that you're only supposed to have water. But there is a cafeteria out there when we take a break, and anybody needs any more information about the building, let us know, but I think everybody knows that. So with that, we'll get started. Anything you want to say, Barrick?
Okay, ready to go.
Okay. At Representative Weissman's request, and luckily and happily, Martin Nelson from Vera will be joining us to give us some information on what is happening in other states and ideas about what we might do. So if we can have her join in online.
I guess any other housekeeping, everybody got the materials that Carrie and Barrick sent out. Thanks for doing that, getting that organized. Very helpful.
Yeah, and I know it's a lot, and we will be working through a lot of it in the next couple of meetings, so appreciate it.
Another I didn't. Distillation. Really helpful. Don't imagine it's small. We just found out that AI does not work.
Right. Yes, we do have that. And we also have like a chart the way that I know Carrie worked on of everybody who testified and where they were from and a brief summary of their testimony. So that was also in your materials. So that will help you.
Just added to the folder, one of the things I'll be going through is a PowerPoint that has all the members or all of our witnesses' testimony, specifically as it relates to the questions asked around mission, operations, the number of entities. So we're going to talk through that as kind of a primer to this group, then digging into those questions. Carrie, it looks like we are still waiting. Tom and Maureen, do we want to
Skip ahead.
skip ahead and tackle the charge of the executive order so we stay on time?
Yeah, I'm happy to repeat what I know Maureen and I have been repeating every meeting. But I think it's important, our express mission for the governor's executive order is to study and make recommendations outlining the structure, location, purpose, and composition of a future permanent multidisciplinary evidence-based entity or entities with dedicated year-round staff to address matters related to criminal and juvenile justice. That's what we're here for. The challenge of that task that exists for all of us is to objectively review and consider thoughts and ideas of all the information and comments we've gathered, and then to hone in on the mission, resulting in a pragmatic and actionable recommendation. I don't want to discount anything we've heard, and we've heard a lot of passionate and well-reasoned pleas for specific changes in policy and approaches to criminal justice in general. It was important to hear all of that, and there will come a time to consider many of those issues raised. So while much of those comments will serve as a starting point for any new entity or entities, addressing individual policy matters is not our task at hand. Rather, I guess, as we move forward today and in the next month, we really have to stay focused on the limited mission, be respectful of one another, and attempt to provide our individual talents to seek a unified and well-reasoned concept to guide future policymaking groups. As difficult as it may be, our roles here are not to inject our individual passions or personal goals for policy change, but rather to collaborate on providing a purpose, structure, and membership template for future groups who will do that work. If we succeed in that endeavor, I have no doubt that many of you will be on any new entity or entities that can pursue those more focused policy objectives. So just hang in there.
Well said, Tom.
Give them another minute or we dive even further ahead in the agenda.
I'd say go for it. Why don't you start?
Mike has a.
As I mentioned,
Mike?
Representative White
Sorry,
has a.
thank you. While we're, I appreciate that, Mr. Raines. It's sort of just funny how things come together in life sometimes. This morning on the way in, I was talking to folks from the Colorado Evaluation and Action Lab, which has been engaged by the administration to help with the formulation of evidence-based policy. So of course, I had to ask what in this context is meant by evidence as distinguished from data. Fortunately, there was a ready answer. I actually think it's pretty relevant for our work. Think of a Venn diagram and think of the intersection of three things. The first, of course, is best available research evidence. For example, the sort of stuff that our good professor member works on. Beyond that, decision maker expertise, and we could construe decision maker pretty broadly in our context, I think. And third, we've heard a lot about this, community needs and implementation context. In other words, my words now, not collab, what is based on research evidence and can be effectuated by decision maker expertise, might be evidence-based in one implementation context, say in another state, but not in ours. It's really all three of those. So I actually found that a really useful heuristic. Literally probably half an hour ago, 75 minutes ago, I wrapped that call. So I just thought I'd share that as we get into the guts of the question, what is evidence-based criminal justice policy and how do we set up a framework for arriving at that? Thanks.
Great. Let's go ahead then.
Marta, thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor. If you would introduce yourself and go ahead with your presentation.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Marta Nelson. I'm with the Vera Institute of Justice, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. I have a brief presentation, so I'm going to share my screen, if that is acceptable. Of course, that means I have to find it. All right, let me just start talking and we'll hopefully figure out a way to share the screen. There we go. Just 1 second. Okay. I'm going to share the screen now. Can people see that? Can't hear, so.
Yes, we have your screen. Thank you.
Awesome, and now we'll go to the beginning. So first of all, I just want to say, I've listened to some of the presentations earlier on, and I'm aware of what you are all about, and it is of great interest to the entire criminal justice reform world that you're taking the time to think about what is the best structure to make policy in this area and to really affect change. So I'm thrilled to be asked to give you some insights based on Vera's experience in this area, but just wanted to let you know that we are all watching what you're doing with great interest, and again, commend you for doing what is really difficult work, but which will hopefully have a great impact on the state. So I am the Director of Sentencing Reform at the Vera Institute of Justice. Before this, I was the Director of Government Strategy. So I have worked with a number of different states and localities to affect change. And Vera, just a quick background, we are a nonprofit organization, has been around a long time, since 1961, and our mission is to end mass incarceration, protect immigrant rights, and build safe and healthy communities. So I'm just going to share three things. One are observations from what I've seen thus far of your process, and of the where I think the TCJJ has led you. And two, I'm going to give some examples of focused, time-limited task forces from other jurisdictions, particularly ones that Vera has been involved in. And then third, I'm going to share some examples of transformative attempts to really broaden the lens on what is safety and justice, which I think is certainly an option for you as you do this work. So after listening to some of the presentations and reviewing the materials, and particularly that presentation about what other states are doing in terms of what kind of councils and commissions they have, I mean, it's clear, particularly in the states you were looking at, many of which are Western states, that there are standing oversight and what I would call some more technical assistance bodies, that being a sentencing commission or oversight commissions, particularly for juvenile justice. And that is, somewhat standard practice in these states. And the CCJJ it has sunsetted, but it was more than this. It was really a policy-making body, and mainly system actors with, invited out, quote unquote, outsiders, but mainly system actors that were looking at available data and a fairly consensus-based approach to making policy. And it certainly did make progress, and as you noted, particularly in the beginning. But it seems like it hit somewhat of a brick wall, and that makes sense because this method of system actors sort of working with data through consensus, it just can't resolve sort of the thorniest issues that are facing Colorado and frankly other states, which are how to respond to harm before and after it happens. You could call that sort of sentencing, how to address racial targeting and racial disparities. What's the role of accountability versus punishment? How do we create safe communities? These are difficult issues, and they need a different lens in order to address them. So that's the question. How can Colorado, what kind of structures exist to create and implement change that builds safety and justice? And I have two different sort of models for you. The first is a focused, time-limited, single or related issue task force. And I know this is something that you've been hearing a lot about, or other folks suggest the structure, but sort of what it is that you're going to have members with a range of different expertises. Usually there's legislative and executive representation, and there are directly impacted individuals who sit as members of these task force, not as people invited to come speak or to have a listening session. All those are really important components of these task forces, but directly impacted members should be sitting as members, and those include people who have direct experience with the criminal legal system and crime survivors, and they're often the same people. And these task forces need a mission. And this point, I think, has been made forth. It's not just, hey, look at safety in the community or how can we reduce recidivism, all of which are incredibly important, but there needs to be a directionality to it. And by that, I'm looking at some of the task force that I'll talk about to reduce jail admissions safely, to limit factors that lead to juvenile contact with the juvenile justice system, to end girls' incarceration. There has to be directionality. You could call this a North Star, but there has to be, you're looking for a change to be made in a particular direction, and that is usually a decarcerative direction. So they're given the mission, they're given a task. We need your expertise, all sorts of variety of expertise to develop a solution to this problem. So go. And then the result is a legislative, usually a set of legislative bills or an administrative changes, but sort of a package of reforms that come out of this process. So let me give you a few examples in which Vera has been involved. So the first is the Michigan Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Detention that was created. Again, these can be created legislatively or administratively. This one was done by an executive order from Governor Whitmer and who was on it? Directly impacted individuals, community members, the judiciary, the defenders, the prosecutors, sheriffs. And they created a list of different reforms. I have links to all this, so I can share this. that were enacted into legislation the same year. The final report came out in January. The legislation was enacted in late 2020. And there are a few more reforms needed in pretrial reform, and Vera is engaged with members of this coalition and others on those now. Another example, the Maryland Juvenile Justice Reform Council, which was created by enabling legislation from the Maryland State Legislature in 2019 with a very quick timetable. Final report was due in December 2020. The legislation that came out of this process was enacted in May of 2022, a really sweeping form of reform, the Juvenile Justice Reform Act, which lowered the age of juvenile responsibility, created basically a mandate not to incarcerate juveniles for any misdemeanors or technical violations, and created just a real shift towards diversion. And then finally, the task force to end girls' incarceration, big name, big mission, that happened in New York City from 2017 to 2021. Government agencies were involved, nonprofits, directly impacted people, in this case, girls, and people who had been incarcerated when they were girls, and academics. The result of this committee or task force, 92% reduction in placement admissions for girls, that's, you know, as a sentence, so to speak, and 70% reduction in detention admissions. So that's the task force model. Next thing I want to talk about is to just, and you've heard this from other people too. So the task force has, you know, criminal justice agencies, directly impacted people, academics, all working together on a specific issue. Another model, and they're not necessarily incompatible, but if you think about it, is, and the goal of your task force is to transform the criminal and juvenile justice system. That's an incredible goal, and I love the sort of the breadth and the daringness of it. So if you're really looking to do that, you could really broaden the scope beyond the criminal and juvenile justice system framework, because that framework really is too narrow to build safety. And in the end, I think that's what we're all, why we're all here. We want to build safe, healthy, vibrant communities. And so the justice system is just too narrow of a lens to build safety. You have to broaden it out to other government agencies that work in this area: public health, education, workforce development. And so you could put together a group that would have a broader range of expertise, again, infrastructure, these different areas. You'd want legislative and executive level representation, because, you know, the executive and the legislator are the ones who actually pass the policy, and they need to be involved. And then you want community members, of course, including directly impacted people, to more than just have a seat at the table, to be part of the decision-making mechanism. The mission would be to build safe communities. Coming out of this sort of broader lens, it's broad, but you still have a task, a concrete task. You're not just going to talk about how wonderful the world can be. You want to create concrete recommendations that a state or a locality can implement. And the result is usually a local or state package of recommended legislation or investments. So I don't have an example of how this has been done statewide. It may have been, I haven't been able to find it. So, but Colorado could certainly be the first. There have been local examples of this. And one, and I'm going to just highlight two here. One, I think people in Colorado should be familiar with, because it was in Denver. But starting with St. Paul, coming out of the murder of George Floyd, many different communities put together strategic planning processes to re-envision public safety systems. St. Paul, obviously, right there in the same community as George Floyd. They created this process. It had business community members, faith community, affinity and cultural groups, community organizations, law enforcement, and they created a community public first safety framework that includes an Office of Public Safety. It's housed in the mayor's office in St. Paul. I have the website there, but this was a very broad process that then came up with a solution to build safety in St. Paul. The other example that Vera was involved in was the Task Force on Reimagining Policing and Public Safety in Denver. That had members of the faith community, community groups, the Denver City Council, the district attorney, the defenders, and the public health office. Law enforcement was not involved in this, which I don't think, I won't get into why that is, but ideally you would have law enforcement at the table. And the result of that was 144 recommendations for change. And there's been some implementation, partial implementation of those changes, and certainly a hope that many more will be implemented. So I will stop there and love to talk with folks if they have questions, but again, I really commend you for this process, and I would imagine there'll be very good things coming out of it.
Thank you, Marta. And it's a little easier for me to see folks in the room if you just raise your hand. Our members that are online, if you would use the raise your hand reaction option, so I'd be sure to call you in. But do members of the working group have questions for Ms. Nelson? Maureen, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I have a brief question. I see your two models that are kind of substantially different in some ways, but they're not really like oversight commissions. They're all specifically strategic commissions that an executive order or a legislation, mandated. Do you know of other states that had something similar to TCJJ, where it was oversight with various subgroups or sub-task force that did the specific work, that would be a model that would actually engage, faith communities, directly impacted people, with a little bit broader of a mission?
No, I don't. I think that's a very difficult, it's somewhat of, I won't call it a unicorn necessarily, but if you're talking about one commission that's doing oversight, that's doing policy, that is also trying to, really looking to broaden the definition of who participates, who defines safety, and you're also trying to get stuff done, that's a lot, because as you've heard from various people, it's hard if you really want community membership for them to sustain, coming again and again to a standing council, and legislative policy change tends to happen through, coalitions that are brought together, who have the combination of lived experience and, good policy reasons for things to happen. They have a momentum. They come together, they, build power, and the legislature and governor sort of respond to that. I think I think expecting that sort of policy making change to happen from a standing commission that has also oversight and is just sort of part of the government structure is asking a lot of that. And so I think there's always a need for oversight, and none of what I said says that there shouldn't be oversight. There can be standing, and there should be, and there are, as you've seen in those examples from other states, standing oversight bodies, and most states have those. But for policy making, I think that is a slightly different process. It can be, as data informed, evidence informed. You certainly want experts at the table, of all different types of expertise. But I think that making policy just is a matter of, as I said, advocacy and together with evidence, and that tends to happen not in an ongoing council. It's more time limited.
Yeah, because just as a follow-up, our charge is to develop a permanent entity. So what you're describing is not permanent entities, but short-term entities. And underneath the oversight committee to develop short-term underneath them. Does that happen also? that are informed by community or legislators or executive, whatever.
Right. I haven't heard of that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but that has not been our experience in working in different states. And we work in Vera Institute works in many, many different states. So I think, I mean, I hear what your charge is, but I think you're also hearing from people that that may not be obtainable in a permanent body to do all of those different things. Again, I would put oversight to say, I think permanent oversight is a very important function, and that there should be a permanent body that does that.
Thank you. And then I think we had questions from Mr. Raines and then Rep. Weissman.
Yeah, thank you. I actually think we had a unicorn that could have been retrofitted, and I would kind of allude to the going from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution. I think it was viable. We learned a lot. I think if you look nationally, and I know you do, you won't find something that did
Right.
and achieved what CCJJ did over 15 years. You just won't find it. That doesn't mean there weren't faults in it. And I think we've identified many of those over the last month, and that we should learn from those issues. But it's not, and I'm not sure I wanted to allude to it as a kind of supervisory or what was the word? Oversight committee, as much as a guiding entity that could be reconstructed in terms of melding what you've talked about, but still maintaining the umbrella, because I do think it gave it a unique level of credibility and legitimacy that you don't find in entities attempted in other states. And you could, those subgroups then I think are exactly what you're talking about, subject matter driven, task driven, time limited, focused with subject matter experts involvement. I worry about charged terms that are kind of undefined and that assumptions are made with them. Things like, and I mean, I'll just throw it out there because it resonates with me that the continued use of the term that creates a chasm when we say systems people and people with lived experience is a faulty assumption. Many of those systems people chose that path because of lived experience, and they just went about going after that input a different way. I mean, I would challenge anyone to come at me and ask about my lived experience with violent crime and felons in the family and things like that. So I want to be wary of things like that, as well as community. That community has to be a supremely inclusive term, and we have to be careful about how we throw that word around. There's a community in Lamar. There's certainly communities in Denver. There's Grand Junction. We have to bring it all together. So I guess what I'm saying is, just because what we're talking about may be a unicorn, why not chase the unicorn?
Colorado Spirit. Representative Weissman, please.
Thank you. Evocative image, Mr. Raines, chasing the unicorn. Ms. Nelson, thank you. I'm going to try to lay out some of the major, at least for me, blocks, and then kind of something I'm stuck on as I turn this over in my head, and maybe you can comment. Major block one, I'll admit my own bias. I'm a legislator. I'm very interested in guarding legislative prerogative. That said, there are a lot of examples, putting CCJJ aside. On an annual basis, this body creates things variously called a work group, a task force, a stakeholder process, whatever. Often they only work for one interim, and they bring back a report so that there can be informed legislation the following January or session. I think that mechanism reflects an acknowledgement by the legislature that time is limited when we're in session, frankly, that our scope and expertise are limited, and that we have things to learn from getting the right group of people together and bringing forth a report. I think that model is well known and well worn around here, and very much consistent with guarding legislative prerogative, if that is one's goal. So we have antecedents for that I think are more the horses than the zebras, never mind the unicorn, as Mr. Raines put it. So those are a few blocks. if we look at the structure of the former TCJJ, sort of the durable super committee with various subcommittees or task forces over the long arc, some good things about that structure were when you did get away from the permanent group, there were folks who were brought in because they had some background in, say, pretrial, in, say, sentencing structure, in, say, youth issues. So to me, that narrow aspect of broadening involvement was positive. If we hew to what you are strongly advising and what others have, which is we shouldn't have that kind of empowered superstructure, but rather we should have, I'm just going to make up a range, 12 to 24 month horizon where a group is given a specific mission and tasks to go to work and bring some things back. And I think those have to be different groups because people with depth in juvenile issues are not the same as people with depth in reentry, so on and so on and so on. With all that foundation, then the question in my mind is who or what sort of is in charge of, to use some words that might be loaded, deciding what those time-limited mission sort of specific groups are. I don't know if you heard from reviewing our prior tapes, a little bit of discussion about the sort of the letter model. I got a bit of firsthand experience with that myself last interim in a very different context, tax policy, but legislators initially given a very broad scope would charge a supportive task force of relevant experts with significant differences of opinion and background to go to town for 6 to 12 months on certain things and bring back a report. We also have the behavioral health disorders in the criminal justice system group. I've actually just been in touch with one of our senior nonpartisan staff asking if she knew of other examples, and the answer is there aren't too many. All right, let me stop there, but that's the question that I'm trying to solve, if only for myself. I think the weight of authority from what I've heard so far is this idea of relatively time-limited specific groups, but then how is it determined which of those should spring into action and by whom?
Ms. Nelson, would love for you to react to Representative Weissman's question. And then with the chair's indulgence after this, I'm going to invite members to submit questions so we can move forward with our discussions.
Yes, that's a great question. I think that is definitely the crux of the matter when you're setting up these time-limited issues. I mean, it's done both ways, and a lot of it, of course, has to do with the culture of how a state makes policy. But I think given the legislature's role within any state as the body that that is sort of closest to the community in terms of level of representation by district, I think that setting the goals of a task force in the first place, I think should come from the legislature or some form of legislative directive, because those legislators are hearing from community members about what their priorities are and what issues need to be changed, particularly in the criminal legal system and the juvenile justice system. I would hope that could be a process, right? So advocacy, constituents say we need action on X, Y, and Z, and the legislature responds by studying the issue in a way that brings in many different voices, brings in expertise, brings in data, and then there is a roadmap that would hopefully lead to the legislative process being able to pass some bills, make some, do some budgeting around this. I would hope that in that process there would be representation from executive agencies as well, because obviously the executive is going to have a point of view on this, and the more participation, the more buy-in, the more likely there is to be a package that would meet with executive approval. But I do think sort of choosing the subjects, as it were, should be a process that comes from what the advocacy community, what constituents are think the subject should be, and then the legislature would act on that, and then set up by letter or by whatever form these inclusive task forces.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, we appreciate your time. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to invite the members of this working group, if you've got further questions for Vera, to submit them by email, and we'll reach out to you, Marta, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Nothing
And
like putting you on the spot during a live stream, so I appreciate it.
no, my pleasure. And again, I really commend you for taking on this really important and interesting task that we're all looking at. So good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you for participating.
So with that, as soon as I can get my screen share going here, we are going to move into sharing a bit from what we heard from our different witnesses, particularly as it relates to the questions that were asked of them. And I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. This is a dense slide deck, so it's been put in the Google folder. We'll send it around. What we wanted to do is just cover what we've heard so far. And to kind of ground us, we had the opportunity to hear from more than 50 stakeholders, which is why you've got some thick attachments going out to you, in addition to the written comments that you've received in that folder as well. I think we all know there is a lot of complex feelings and expertise around this topic. So while each witness was asked to address a narrow set of questions aligned with the charge that Chair Raines grounded us in around the future permanent entity, a lot of the thoughts that we had from folks, as you see in your packets, extended well beyond those narrow questions. Here, just real quickly, you will see what some of those questions were, but it really grounded in the creation of the new entity, whether it should be one or more, what the composition should look like, and things around transparency. So I am going to cover in about 5 minutes what should take 30 minutes, just so we can get to the discussion and really start digging into this group's work about taking your expertise and taking what we've heard. I will say very candidly, this is not intended to be exhaustive reporting out on everything we heard. It's really extracting what we heard on those key themes. And as I go through this, you will see, with very few exceptions, if you're looking to hear something, I can show you the line that would agree with you. If you're looking to find something that disagrees with you, we found that well. So I'm just going to dive into what we heard first around the mission or missions of an entity or entities. And a lot of the common themes were, one, that we need to have a clear, definitive purpose for what this is. And we heard from different witnesses to do so to avoid the excessive scope creep while allowing for different approaches to it. A number of folks used words like prioritize, preventing and reducing crime and recidivism. There were multiple witnesses who spoke of this as a public health issue and wanted to see that incorporated when we're talking about what the mission is. Number of people also spoke differently about adult justice and juvenile justice and wanted to see those addressed when we talk about the mission uniquely and discreetly, separate from our conversation about the entities themselves. Multiple people spoke again to public safety being paramount, victims' rights, but also some things about developing a North Star for what we intend our overall systems to accomplish when it comes to both victims and the accused, and addressing recidivism and future going forward. When it came to the question of one or two entities, you did not get a consensus that it should be either. What you heard from the vast majority of the people testifying was the discrete and unique interests and needs of each, the adult justice system and the juvenile justice system, with multiple people particularly commenting on the things that can be done in the juvenile justice system to prevent people from finding themselves in the adult system. So you did have some folks who came out and said it has to be one because it's coordinating. You had some folks who said whether it's two separate or distinct entities, the entity must approach these issues differently, with a few people advocating for two separate entities and more people than that advocating that it be two bodies within one entity so that they are coordinating their approach on each of those. When we talked about operations, which is frankly where we got the greatest amount of input, what the future looks like, This is one place where I think we did hear some clear themes. And one of the biggest was getting out into the community. There was a lot of thought, and you'll see this spill into the membership conversation. Two big themes, though, when we talked operations were get out into the community, make sure communities affected on all aspects of adult and criminal and juvenile justice are involved in this. And the other big theme was around evidence and database practices. And people wanted to see that in the operations. They wanted to see it potentially named in the mission. They wanted us to really name what we were trying to accomplish rather than just having a lofty mission that leaves so much room for future iterations to take that in different directions. There was some concern that if we stayed too vague in the mission, that when we got to the operations, it could undermine that specificity. Continuing on in the operations discussion, there was a couple of folks who noted that a lot of this work will find its way downstream and that ultimately it's going to have an effect on municipal courts and on communities. So to be sure that to the maximum extent possible, we're engaging those experts, those people with lived experience, with professional experience at the local level into these conversations. You did have a couple of people that named the interest in bill writing authority. I'm not going to elevate that and say it was consensus, but it was raised by several people who spoke to all of you. I think the other big thing was make this forward thinking. Some concerns that we establish a body that is really focused on the dynamics of today, and it's not got that forward-looking mission in how it's structured to operate. Finally, on the operations side, we heard things about the politicization and a real desire to see both the mission name and an operational structure, this be an evidence-based and data-based approach to all of its ultimate goals. Some people mentioned, again, I talked about whether we should have one or two entities. A lot of people testified to this group about the need for there to be an overarching operational structure, but working groups, whether we call them task force subcommittees or what you will, but a structure that allows for us to bring in additional members and to bring in additional expertise to really go deep on discrete topics. And then we heard from several people finally on this front about the need for this to not necessarily go down the path that it did before. We had at least 4 different people that pushed back on the thumbs in the middle option, and a real desire to see a body that pushed to consensus, pushed to decision-making, but also left room within that for the robust debate and for a dissenting opinion to be shared. But we heard from several people that it felt, I think the words that were recorded were a cop-out or the easy way out, when we allow people to just say, I kind of like it. So I'll leave that for you to do with as you will. When it comes to membership, and at this point, I'm going to ask Carrie to start handing out this handout. Already did, never mind. We're just handing that out for you guys to scribble notes when we wrap this up. On membership, a lot of the thoughts were around community members and making sure that we have as diverse. You heard multiple people who testified before you who brought lived experience and advocacy experience say that it felt a lot like the words we heard repeatedly were institutional actors, and a desire to see an expansion of who the voting members are, both on the main group itself and if you've got discrete subcommittees or task forces going after unique pieces of it. We also heard the need to engage local governments as stakeholders, given the role that they will play on all facets of juvenile and adult justice, including reintegration. And finally, a desire to make sure that we have youth voices included in here. Last topic I will get to is the reporting and housing. And I would love to tell you that your witnesses gave you the clear answer. They absolutely did not. What we heard from a handful who addressed it was that either you should absolutely have it in the legislature, you absolutely should not have it in the legislature, you absolutely should have it in any department or not. I think what we heard from all of those advocating for the different options was the desire to depoliticize it. And there were some concerns that in either case, you're subject to either the party in control or the executive in control, and a desire to look at different options for whether those are staggered terms or different appointment processes that to the best ability possible mitigate against the politicization of this body. Within that, people did say that that reporting or that housing needed to allow it to operate truly independently, whether it's situated at a state government agency or department, that it not necessarily answer to the ED of that department, or if it sits in the legislature, that it's not answering to one party or the other. And we have true bipartisanship or true neutrality is what people talked more about. The last topic before I want to turn us into some conversation was around transparency. And the biggest thing people were talking about here was that these meetings or the CCJJ meetings in the past, and some commented on our own meetings, felt inaccessible because of venue, time, or their ability to attend. And a push to, again, as we talked about with membership, to get out into the communities to the maximum extent possible, to make these accessible to folks who would like to attend that may have 9-to-5 work shifts, or they may do other shift work. So people really want to see that transparency with a lot of public reporting, both multilingual reporting, access to all of the conversations, and an understanding with transparency about what was trying to be accomplished in addition to just the conversations or votes that were taking place. With that, I'm going to take a breath. What I'm hoping we can do today is I'd love to respond to any questions you have. You do all have this full deck in your Google Drive as well. On the agenda, our intention is to start workshopping through these issues around mission and missions, around operations and membership and duties. I'm under no delusion that we're going to solve all of that today. And rather, after talking with the chairs, rather than trying to go an inch deep on all of them, we're going to go in depth, just in sequence, and we'll get as far as we can, and we'll continue talking as we need to. But I want to pause there. I want to invite you, these worksheets, I have no intention of collecting these. What I'm going to hope that you'll do is just start scribbling your notes as we have conversations, reflecting on what you heard from our presentation this morning, what you saw in the write-ups from our testimony, and what I've just shared, and collect your own thoughts on these as we go forward in our next couple of conversations. But the first thing I'd like to do is just open it up to the floor for all of our members for your reactions and takeaways from what you've heard. And maybe we can start at the big picture and the first topic being the mission of the organization. No.
No, I think before we start on particular topics, I think each member of the working group, which we have, is reflections, thoughts, and key takeaways from each member of the group. Like, what did it give you? What did it lack? Are there anything else we need? What's your feeling about our mission at this point? By mission, I mean the mission of this group, TCJJ, to establish. And, where are you on that? What struck you? Because we haven't talked at all. Basically, we've been listening, and I want it, before we go into a mission, I think I want to hear just from everybody about their reflections and their thoughts.
Great. So let's do that. And then we will take a short break after that and then come back and go more in depth. On this one, I am not going to wait for people to raise their hands. I'm going to take facilitator's prerogative and call on people. So Senator Gardner, I'll go with you, and then I'll go to Jason. If I could ask members to make sure you use the mic key.
So, in response to Maureen and what I've heard, my thoughts on this, I guess I could cut sort of right to the chase. I think we ought to be housed with 2.0 in the Department of Public Safety. I think it should be one entity with two sub-entities, one criminal and one juvenile. And I think there'd be a very big challenge on how those two groups interacted and what would be, if it was a strictly juvenile matter, whether it would need to go back to the whole body or not, or whether they operate almost as two entities, and that may have to work out over time. Legislative participation. I'm as biased as they can be, as one can be about this. I think it's critical to have legislative participation, and I think it's critical that the legislative participation be voting. And I may be outvoted on all of that. Why do I think that, though? I think that because if a group of experts, and with all respect, because I'm an expert on certain things and sit in an ivory tower too, if a group of experts sits in a room and comes up with a grand idea to propose as legislation that is dead on arrival at the legislature, then it makes no sense. Why not then just have an ex officio member? Why, then we'd be there and we could say, hey, wait, I've got 10,000 things to do. I make a living other than this one and so forth. All to say that if I have something on which I'm an ex officio member, and I've got two things to do today, and one of them is something I vote on and the other is something I'm an ex officio on, I can tell you which one I'm going to do. There is only one of me going around. And I guess in terms of operations, there's so much to talk about there, but I do think that what CCJJ did in terms of bringing things forward and reaching consensus had a lot of value. So that's probably far longer than anybody asked for. I'm used to being told I'm wrong, so go ahead and tell me I'm wrong.
I think we're going to refrain from that part of it. I have no doubt we'll get into some debates as the conversation continues. I'm going to go to Jason and then Vincent for just your big picture takeaways and where we are with the charge given by the executive order to this group and some of your high level takeaways.
Okay, so in looking at the research and hearing from other states that are similar to Colorado, not similar to Colorado, we have the I like the phrase unicorn. We have the ability to create a structure that truly does create this unicorn. With regard to the mission, I feel that it's important to uphold justice as well as address the inequities that are experienced within marginalized communities and ensure that the representation of justice and equity is at the forefront with the people that are going to participate in the ensuing structures that we create. I think that in hearing a lot of the testimony from people with the entities, due to the intricacies that exist within the adult system and within the juvenile system. And I think that it should be two separate entities. And I also believe, though, that there should be an intermediary between the two that's able to compare notes, because perhaps the two groups may be dealing with the same crucibles or may need. I know that there's a pathway. If individuals are engaged in the juvenile justice system, there's a high likelihood that they'll be involved in the criminal justice system. So if we could have someone that has the ability to address those dynamics featured in both groups, that would be great. And to compare notes, but two separate entities. As far as operation goes, I think that we heard a lot from great stakeholders all throughout the state that, we have to be the inclusive we and not the exclusive we. And with the operations, it felt like people were, feeling as though they weren't a part of something or could not be a part of something. While I appreciate the evidence-based comments that were mentioned by several people, even today, I want to embrace evidence-based, but I also worry that if one is married to the idea of evidence-based and implementing evidence-based tactics, that we may miss the innovation that is created at local universities or in other states. And because things aren't evidence-based, we may miss the opportunity to do something that could positively affect our state. So I think that we should be open to evidence-based and innovation. I like the idea of, if you, in my community, we say it with your chest. So if you are going to make a vote. I think that, we owe it to the state and the citizens to share why we voted the way that we did. I think that that represents, there's intersections because that represents transparency also. Almost done. Membership. So again, we, for me, I heard a lot about people that are involved in the juvenile justice and the criminal justice, but as a parent of a young man with disabilities or different abilities, as I like to say, I think that we missed the mark in hearing from people that could speak to the overrepresentation of people with disabilities that's featured in both the juvenile system and the criminal justice system. And I just want us to remain cognizant of including that voice in whatever entities we create, ensuring that people understand the need to address mental health or brain health, however you like to call it. I want us to be sure that equal representation with regard to political factors are in place, meaning that we need to hear from the Republicans, we need to hear from the Democrats, and we need to have the independent voice as well. Colorado features all three of these people, and it ought to be featured in whatever entities it is that we create. Let's see here. There was a lot of emphasis on system actors, and folks felt as though the system actors were boisterous in sharing what needs to happen next. As far as the membership, we have to have those folks that have lived experiences, and the lived experiences need to be, from my opinion, people that are dealing with that have survived situations, and the relatives of people that have not survived the situations, as well as people that are facing sentencing inequities because of their background or because of just the inequities in their particular jurisdiction or their judicial district. Housing, now this is something that I am wet behind the ears on. I heard Senator Gardner here mention the public safety, housing public safety, and I just hope that wherever it's housed, that the work gets done. I think that in listening to I don't know, Miss Nelson's presentation, one thing that raised a red flag for me was the efforts that were done in Denver and how I think 100+ recommendations were done, but only a few were partially implemented. I think that that scares me if people are devoting their time to something bigger than themselves and yet things get partially implemented. I think that we need to be able to come with true recommendations that are going to overhaul the juvenile justice and criminal justice system and be noteworthy in the United States of America, and probably we create what the example ought to be here in Colorado. The last thing is transparency. We heard a lot of people speak that they felt as though they weren't able to be a part of something special like this because they have to work during the hours. We heard other people say that coming to this building creates trauma and creates power dynamics for them due to their life experiences. So I think that there needs to be a balance where with regard to transparency, we do meet in the community, or not we, but the people, that are going to move forward with this, that they don't have to come to some big government building or county building or whatever. And I think the most important thing, and I say this solely because of my experience working at Colorado Department of Human Services, the voice within the 470 corridor is very, very, very important. However, the voice outside of the 470 corridor is something that we need to be sure to be included. Because I feel at times the smaller counties, the rural areas are overlooked, and those people are experiencing things that on a micro level, but it's more impactful because the work, in my opinion, is harder there because you're having to make decisions and you see the same people in the grocery stores and you're making policy based off of the people that you see within your own community. So all I'm saying is that I think whatever happens needs to be in the community. And I guess the last thing that I want to say is folks said that they really didn't feel included. And I think to commend you all. You all created a link and tried to make it one. I think the last time we were together, a lot of people who were on in, a lot of people were in the room, so people caught it. And I think that now moving forward, each entity, if we choose to go down that fashion, should have listening tours from time to time and see is their efforts effective, and if their efforts are deemed to be ineffective, try to solicit opinions from the citizens that could probably give them advice on how to make things better to feel a little bit more inclusive. One more thing, and then I'll pass it to you. I worry that if there's no time limits set, no real time limits set with regard to what the recommendations are, that this thing will drone on and no true recommendations will be made to overhaul juvenile justice and criminal justice. So whatever entity it is that we create, I think that there needs to be set timelines. And I don't know if it can mirror the legislative session. I don't know what it could be to have a stop and finish line, but with regard to coming with real recommendations that are going to overhaul the juvenile justice and criminal justice system. But if we don't put in timelines with regard to the expectations of the structure, I worry that we'll end up spinning our wheels and possibly have the outcomes of some of the things we saw from Ms. Nelson, where things were partially implemented and not and it didn't raise up to what it was called to do.
All right. Thank you, Jason. I'm going to go ahead and move us along, and I want to assure everybody we're going to have time to go deep into each of these issues and really get people's specific suggestions and ideas. Would love Vincent and then Debbie to get your big picture takeaways on where we are compared to where your thinking was when we first started meeting, back in December, and where your current thinking is.
Well, I'll do what I can. I don't have a pen with me, so I'm just gonna, no, it's too late for that. Thank you.
Let's just start with what he said.
Yeah, with what he said is great. And thank you so much, Jason. I think that I just want to observe that with sitting here on a working group to transform criminal and juvenile justice, the obvious is that we are acknowledging that some transformation is desirable. And that we're not just maintaining a status quo of criminal and juvenile justice. And so that would suggest that there is some accumulation of either feeling or evidence that something is not quite as just as we would like to see it. I think that to that end, when we talk about mission, it's difficult for me to separate out my mission as a health advocate, which is always hinging on this etymology of this word health, which is a word that in English, when you look up the etymology, is tied to a Middle High German word that means whole, and acknowledging that pretty much everything we do in America when it comes to health is a cutaway of that. We have health for your feet, and we have health for your eyes, and we have health for your gastrointestinal system, but we rarely have health for the whole person. And even more rarely do we have health for the whole community. And so when I think about justice and safety, it is very difficult for me I'm so used to thinking about the whole that I don't get comfortable with those segregations of roles and responsibilities into different things. And so when I think about a governing entity and the function of government, it's about the health and well-being of the human community. That's the sole focus of our work as far as I'm concerned, while I sometimes think that some of the role of government is the health and well-being of, I don't know, somebody's corporate interests or something like that. Ours is the health and well-being of the human community, and what the role of our public safety interventions are and the role of our health interventions they are actively and systematically segregated to our unfortunate condition, because we can't continue to segregate those functions and systems without perpetuating unfortunate outcomes with regard to our human health and well-being. So, I think that the mission has to be the health and well-being of the community. And that is the inclusive health and well-being of the community. Because the exclusive health and well-being of the community is pretty good. The way, you look at Colorado, I moved here after working for a long time in the Bronx and in Brooklyn and in Southern California. And when I first got to Colorado, I went driving around to look for the challenges and thought, well, this is manageable. You've got 5.8 million people and your scale of problems is like this versus California with its 40 million people and its scale, and New York with its scale. It ought to be manageable here. So I feel like Colorado, that unicorn, here's an opportunity to really get this right for putting public safety and justice practices in place that are exemplary for the United States with regard to sentencing reform and focus on outcomes and focus on recidivism reduction, focus on safety interventions that yield pathways to health as opposed to pathways to criminalization, justice decision-making that are likewise pathways to health in terms of restoring people to the community as much as possible. So I feel like the mission has got to be more inclusive and, hearkening to Tom's, was it 16 years that the CCJJ was active? There's good work there. Maybe the issue with membership was just that it was too narrowly focused on those singular tools of safety and justice without understanding that you can't have safety and justice without health and housing and education. So as far as one or two entities, I definitely understand that adults are different from juveniles, but I'm also in the habit of pointing out that we all have a continuity of our life and well-being from one end of life to another, and that transition from being a child to being an adult is fuzzy, and it's also very poorly represented by our statutes. Scientists will suggest that we are not fully formed as biological adults until maybe our mid-20s, when our brain finishes developing. And yet we have a justice practice that enables very young people to be tried as adults in some circumstances. Then we've got a voting age of 18 and we've got a drinking age of 21. Our concept of adult and juvenile is poor. And so to that extent, I think that one entity that understands human continuity and continues to apply evidence to a refined effort to distinguish between what is a child and what is an adult, that's part of the charge of a singular entity. And then the sub-entities and those limited focus task forces that come under that entity can continue to chip away at that distinction. Operational things, I think that there was a bunch of emphasis on depoliticization of all of this. And I think that the word depoliticize, if that's the word, is not necessarily very helpful. The word politics, polis, it's all tied to city. It's a shared dwelling. It's about community. We can't decommunity the community effort, but what we can do is acknowledge that our politics have gotten to a state where, rather than understanding the importance of have a shared focus on unity as strength and union as strength and being united as strength, we've gotten to a place where we are tearing each other apart with our divisiveness and our failure to understand that even when our opinions are different, where we want to get is the same, and that is we want health and well-being to the greatest extent possible from one end of life to the other for ourselves, our family members, and our communities. So I think that it's not depoliticizing so much as uniting and not dividing in our operational effort. As far as the membership, I think I made a remark about having that more inclusive understanding that it's more than just Department of Public Safety, law enforcement, corrections, et cetera. and the judiciary that have to be focused on transformation. It's got to also be an understanding that it's housing and healthcare, supports and services, education, all the different components of things that we bring to bear in supporting the health and well-being of a human. Housing it under the Department of Public Safety, you know, with great respect for the Department of Public Safety and the value of that, it still is suggested, well, if these are our tools and this is our framework, we're not wholly inviting in that broader understanding of the different components that need to be in play here, we're going to be tipping ourselves into habitual ways of approaching things. And so I'm not sure about housing it in the Department of Public Safety. I wouldn't want to house it in the Department of Public Health either, or the BHA. Yeah, right.
And I'm
So-
sorry, Vincent, can I get you
Yeah.
to another
And
minute or so, and then I
transparency.
need to move us along.
You know, transparency, absolute transparency. It's all going to come out one way or another in the wash. So why not be wholly transparent from the get-go? That would be of service.
Thank you. And I'm going to go next to Debbie and then to the sheriff. I do want to pull us back up a little bit. And maybe I need to reframe this conversation. We passed around this worksheet really for folks to be taking notes and just sharing your idea or capturing your thoughts as we continue this. What I'd like to do is really pull us back up to more of a high level. We're going to go down each of these rabbit holes on the entities, the structures, the composition of each of these. What I'd like to do is pull us back up to kind of the short form version of what have been your key takeaways from what we have heard so far and your reflections on those, with the understanding we're going to go down each one of these in specific dedicated conversations. Debbie and then Sheriff Fitzsimons, please.
I think I got this.
Fair enough. And we will get everybody else a break in once we go through this, but appreciate you. Debbie, please.
I got this. When I was first involved, I had no conception at all. I came in with my eyes open. What I now feel is that we need a holistic approach to public safety. After reflecting on my experience involving a recent immigrant who was expelled from school, who was kicked out of his home, and who eventually committed a crime, a violent crime, I see no way out other than it being holistic and inclusive of health and safety and mental health and education and help for immigrants. And I don't see another way to do it other than that.
I appreciate that, Debbie. I think we're going to have those conversations of how do we approach doing just that. What are the structural implications and the composition and the operational? So thank you. Sheriff Fitzsimons and then Chair Kane.
Okay, I'll try to keep this short as well. You know, I loved what I've heard so far. I've sort of made the same highlights and notes that you guys captured up on the board. That wasn't lost on me. I have all of those highlighted. I'm a big believer in unicorns. I'm a big believer in encouraging communities, staff to think outside the box and color outside the lines. I have a lot of those programs at the sheriff's office currently that nobody else has. I think this should be a structure sort of like we have here, the people that are here, with a criminal justice and the juvenile justice subgroup underneath that. Strongly believe those need to be separated out, but I think that there needs to be a body over those two subgroups. And then maybe to check the box of these time-limited task force, maybe those task force live underneath those two groups, and those are time limited. Maybe during the interim, during the summer when the legislative bodies are out, because as we all know, things get crazy from January to May around here. Love what Tom said about, I felt something about the continuance of the system actors, and it's kind of Tom described, I'm certainly not sitting here by virtue. You know what I mean? I loved what you said, Tom, about, some of us, it's what we've been through that has guided us towards being to where we are and trying to be as effective as we can in the community. So I believe there's no coincidences. We're all here for a reason. We all belong here, and let's find the unicorn.
Thank you, Sheriff. And I hate cutting any of these conversations short, which is why I want to assure,
Yeah, because I had pages. Of
I know, and we are going to tap all of those.
I was going to
What-
beat all of these guys.
What I'm loving is that we're getting that mix of really the clear tactical and operational things, as well as the big picture vision and mission and things. Am I getting the wave by the chairs? Very, very well. I'm going to turn all the way over to my right to Janet then. Called out of nowhere. Matt's getting a pass. We will, once we go through the folks in the room, I'm going to go to Janet. We'll see if the bottle's back. Victoria, Representative Weissman, and we will tap in the director and Tristan, who are with us online.
I got you. Well, let me just start by saying thank you for the opportunity to be here and learn so much. The presentations have been great. My overall takeaways are that I appreciate we had some hard conversations, or for me, maybe it was hard listening because it felt bad for somebody who sat on CCJJ and worked really hard to come together and bring solutions, to hear people just be very critical about process, lack of inclusivity, et cetera. I did not feel good about that, but I also felt like it was important that we got that feedback and that we were paying attention to it. I'm actually sitting here still feeling like I would like more information, and I know that we're really time pressed, so I am reluctant to say that. But when I'm thinking about how to fill a gap and what our mission should be and look like, I'm really wanting a better picture of what our landscape is now in Colorado. And so I don't mean to undermine the work that's been done. I really appreciate especially the other state overviews, but I am aware in a kind of vague way that we have all these different commissions and task forces that address criminal and juvenile issues. And so I would like to be thinking about, does the Commission on Behavioral Health, people who are involved in the justice system, who are juveniles, whatever that name is, like, what are they doing? Are they looking, to Vince's point, at truly marrying up mental health and behavioral health with, figuring out what services are necessary for juveniles who are involved in the criminal justice system? And if they are, should we maybe enhance that group, or should that group be incorporated into the models that we are thinking about? Or because that work's being done well and effectively by that group, we should consider that a gap that we don't need to fill? And I don't know the answer to those questions. And I think there are other groups in the landscape that are doing work in the criminal and juvenile justice systems. And so I feel like when we're doing a strength and gap analysis to figure out what our recommendations are, I'd like to know more about that work. Are those other entities successful in what they're doing? Are they time limited? Are we going to be creating new groups that are just repurposing the same stakeholders from one thing to another? To Senator Gardner's point, we all end up in multiple meetings. And I joke sometimes we're trying to do justice one meeting at a time. If you're in meetings all the time, you can't get the actual work done. And so it's important, I think, for us to identify, and we have identified largely, who some of the critical systems-based stakeholders are, and now how can we figure out how to be more inclusive and transparent in the affected communities. I think I'll probably leave it there, and then I'll be happy to deep dive on some of the more structural and membership questions that when you're ready for that.
I appreciate that, Janet. And I will get with the chairs and probably Matt and possibly Dr. Ryan at CDPHA and probably Rep. Weissman to see if we can't pull together more information, because you're right. There are so many, whether it's legislatively created short-term or standing councils like our Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Council. So we'll see if we can't get a quick readout of those back to all of you. And then I will offer that that may be a topic you all consider when you talk about the operation and mission, is what role you play engaging with any of those. With that, Ubaldo, I'm going to go to you, and then to Victoria for your big picture takeaways of what you're hearing and reflections, with the understanding we're going to go all the way deep into the weeds on these in unique conversations.
Great, thank you so much. I actually jotted down a bunch of my reflections and thoughts. And so I'd like to just read those and share them with you all. I'd like to start off by saying that this is an incredibly immense endeavor and will need to be robust. And also we have a chance to set precedents for our country and the world. We have a unique opportunity to create real, tangible, lasting change and improvement, positive change that can influence our communities and a state for generations. And so let's get this right. I have a quote from Gabor Mate that I'd like to read real quickly. It's very short. He's a Canadian physician, world-renowned trauma expert and medical doctor. If you study prison populations as I have, you see a common preponderance of childhood trauma and mental illness. The two go together. So a lot of people are being punished for being mentally ill, and they're mentally ill because they were traumatized as kids. So what we have in prisons are the most traumatized people in our society. Here are a few points that I'd like to highlight. And then I also came up with 10 major points that I think we need to focus on. So the first is employment opportunities, housing assistance for formerly incarcerated persons, support services tailored to meet former offenders' needs, effective supervision of probationers and parolees in the community, safe prison communities where offenders will not experience further harm, drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs for offenders with substance abuse disorders, vocational programs for those who could benefit from training for gainful employment and trade skills, life skills, therapy, and coping strategies so offenders can get to the root of why they committed crimes. States should also invest heavily in implementing education programs inside prisons and detention centers. Offenders must have the tools they need to understand their background and potential trauma they experience so they know why they committed crimes in the first place. Educational and behavioral tools can help them identify the root problem that led to their criminal behavior. So I'm going to go through 10 points real quickly. This won't take long at all. The first one is goals. Interject hope and create faith and trust. Community safety, of course. Reduce recidivism. Restructure the Department of Correction facilities and processes. Restructure community corrections facilities and processes. Install programs and systems to improve assessments, psychological profiles, behaviors, and habits. Relook at and improve pre-sentence investigation reports. Relook at and improve supervision, probation, and parole. Improve and correct the disparity in judgment and sentencing by considering circumstances, context, environmental influence, past trauma, substance use disorder, and mental health. Incentivize growth, accomplishment, behavior, and community service. Recognize the power of education and employment. Number 2, culture change. We must change mindsets and behaviors. Place people in positions of authority who are screened and vetted for showing love, care, and compassion for humanity. People who are passionate about positive change, willing to try new, innovative tools, provide those tools, and place people who are able to see justice with a fresh perspective. The goal must be a real paradigm shift. Again, we need an emphasis on rehabilitation and reformation, not simply just incarceration and punishment. Accountability is number 3. True oversight with enforcement and consequences for not following protocols or not properly assisting clients with empathy and follow through. Number 4, facility inreach, to make sure those with lived experience are connecting directly with inmates and facility staff. Number 5, education, teaching positive moral values and principles to the youth and to the adult population, and we must start as young as possible. Number 6, immediate intervention, root causes, trauma-informed approach, substance use disorder prognosis, cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, counseling and mentorship, emotional trigger recognition, coping mechanisms, outlets, anger management. Positive and strategic education and rehabilitation should be mandatory. This is not an option. This is what incarceration is and what it should look like in the future. Number 7, social services, improvement on follow-up, home visits, community organization, and support parental guidance and family strengthening. Number 8, leadership. All who work within the confines of the criminal justice system to be newly evaluated on their impact regarding their scope of work and an emphasis on accountability and positive engagement. This includes case managers, correction officers, police officers, and administrative staff. 9, strategic technique implementation. Provide strategies to stem criminogenic relapse and encourage peer support. And then finally, 10, training. Development and implementation of evidence-based training and innovation focused on neuroscience, streamlined training across all divisions under the Department of Justice with new and proven strategies and techniques. And let's see here. I think that's it. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. And I'm going to invite you, if you're willing, and any others that have written comments, if you want to email those over to Carrie, we'll make sure those get incorporated into our notes. I know she was typing it as well, but appreciate that. I'm going to go to Ms. Terranova, then to Rep. Weissman, and then as a heads up, I will be going online to Tristan, Director Hilke, and Justin, who is here on behalf of Emily. I will give you the option, but I will not put you on the spot. Just want to give the folks online a heads up. Be coming to you shortly, and then we'll come back into the room for the chairs to close this session off. We'll take a quick break. But Victoria, your reflections on where we are.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for all of your time and coordination of everything we've done. You know, the reform entities, like committees like this and initiatives, large scale initiatives and things that have failed at all levels, however you vary, empirically, if you really look at them and the literature that's out there on that has really largely kind of summed it up as like there's too narrow of a focus, and not necessarily because it starts too narrow, but because coordination and implementation of those changes and over time, focus tends to narrow innately, right? And I think, you know, one of the cool things about CCJJ and TCJJ and the future entity that we're all here to structure is that it is a unicorn. And the empirical term for that is captain agency, which may look a little better on paper. And I like unicorn, though. I think that's cool. Captain agency sounds really good, too. And what a captain agency is really defined as is an oversight entity or group that coordinates research, systems, and subsystems. And I think what's really used, and it's very rare to have captain agencies at any level. And that's what I think Dr. Nelson was probably getting at as well this morning. I think Colorado was on its way with that. And, you know, I think how we're thinking forward is to enable growth in how the captain agency can coordinate these subsystems. And I think the subsystems have changed over time since CCJJ first started. And the testimony we've heard, I think, really validated a lot of that, where we're hearing maybe 15 years ago, we wouldn't be hearing so much about community involvement and getting the voices of those who are directly impacted by these decisions at the table as much as we do, and how important that is now. And so I think that, you know, my takeaway so far is that has really been validated. And what I envisioned for this when learning that TCJJ was, you know, a thing and we're revitalizing and revising what has been done, was that I think moving forward, that is totally possible. I think the pillars of your captain agency empirically, and what I keep hearing from the community and in our discussions are three, and we can really simplify it to individual causes of justice involvement at both levels, right? Adult, juvenile, community causes, and disparate or injustice causes. And I think maybe starting with a template like that, as what I've been hearing, could be a really useful framework for how the captain agency can coordinate all of the other spokes in the wagon wheel as it sits kind of in the middle, right? Because it's a system. And then, the operations that we heard a lot about more specifically in the testimony, like timeline, accessibility, all the transparency stuff, seems to be completely possible in implementation underneath that larger structure. So I think my larger takeaway is, all the themes that you all identified seem to be really consistent with what was jumping out in my notes and what I was hearing. And I think that, the want for the structure moving forward with this is completely possible and aligned with the implementation that I think we're hearing from the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Terranova. Representative Weissman, and then I'm going to go online to Tristan, Director Hilke, if you're available, and Justin, if you wanted to jump in. Weissman.
Thank you. Appreciate learning new terms. Couple of broad comments first. To Ms. Drake's point, I can at least somewhat empathize with that. I was thinking about this again this morning coming in. I went from carrying the bill to continue CCJJ in 2018, and it was harder than it needed to be. Mr. Raines was there. He was a great counterparty. The difficulty was elsewhere. To being the one to make the motion to PI the bill and effectively put us here this past April or May. I had a certain concept of CCJJ, and more than that, I had a concept of others' concepts of it. I've done, 6, 7, 8 CCJJ bills since my first term, since 2018. What became increasingly painfully clear to me was that my concept of others' concepts was wrong, that trust had been lost. I tried very hard to make clear in conversations I had and what I said on the record in committee that I was not trying to pass negative judgment on the hundreds or thousands of hours that a lot of people have put in, including chairs of our committee here. Times change, sensibilities evolve, and we have to evolve with them. Concerning Mr. Atchity's comments that I really appreciated, you reminded me of something I read in a book by one of the popularizers of medicine in our society going back 20-some years. We generally lump it all together as medicine, but this writer was breaking it down, Asclepian medicine versus Hygeian medicine. Asclepius being the Greek physician god. That's the interventionist stuff. That's you fall off a cliff and you break your body and we, putting you back together. Put cost aside, as a matter of medical technology, at least we're pretty good at that in this country. Frankly, for as wealthy as we are, we're lousy at the other medicine, which is Hygeian medicine. Hygeia, hence our hygiene, was the daughter of the Greek physician god Asclepius. That's what we would maybe summarize to wellness. By analogy to the criminal legal system, the Asclepian reaction is somebody has done harm to the body politic, we'll put them away for a while. But how do we keep that from happening in the first instance? How do we build the fence at the edge of the cliff so somebody doesn't fall off and break their body, requiring that intervention, or by analogy, so somebody does not commit a crime and hurt somebody else and get wheels turning against themselves and a broader community? We have a system going back a long time that kind of knows what its Asclepian responses are. We're here, and Mr. Atchity, you put it better than I ever could, we're here to figure out the Hygeian responses upstream of the Asclepian ones. One big thing that I feel like I've heard a lot is the need for whatever future thing that we do, or things, frankly, to listen more. I will admit the shortcomings of the ability of the legislative process to listen. We have gavel, we take we take testimony in every committee hearing on every bill. That's very important. No, I don't think every state has that. We know Congress doesn't. Typically, however, it's 3 minutes, maybe a bit more, maybe plus some Q&A. And it is here, and even with Zoom, it does entail people making certain adjustments and sacrifices in their day and in that period of January to May. When we look to using the rest of the time in the year, June to December, there can be more flexibility. We're all more or less comfortable in this place, some of us in particular. I grant that this can be intimidating to come into a place like this. And I think there's a lot to be said in there being, let's call them listening sessions in non-government places, shall we say, a library, maybe a community room. Lots of options that way. With all that said, quick details, knowing we'll return later. I don't know if it qualifies as a captain agency, but in my mind, and I'm still struggling with this, how to answer the question, who or what sets up those task forces that we've talked about, the time-limited, mission-driven entities with diverse representation. My mind goes to a legislative interim committee, composition from both chambers, from members of both parties, maybe majoritarian in nature, possibly not. Maybe it's the letter model, maybe it's something else, but that group of folks elected by their communities to come to this place makes the initial decision, hey, we need a group to look at this for, 18 months. And it needs to have broad representation. And we don't give the whole 100, don't give infinite discretion to this committee to scope out. We put some parameters in statute. There should be representation from people with lived experience. There should be representation from survivors of crimes. There should be representation from system actors. There should be staff support from the legislative branch, LCS, LLS, maybe the auditor, maybe the JVC. There should be representation from the folks at TCJJ or whatever we're going to rename it to. I don't believe that we should house the whole thing in DPS. I think that folks at DPS have things to contribute, and I want to be clear about that. Then, frankly, the legislative committee steps back and goes into a listening mode, and the task force goes to work. Some of those meetings might be in here. Some of those meetings should be out there. There should be a Zoom option. Consideration should be given to issues of language, issues of time of day of the meetings, accessibility in other senses. Do we have sign language interpretation? I'm familiar with a few other places in Colorado revised statutes where parameters like this have been put down. We'll be happy to suggest where those may be found. 24.4.109 may be on the environmental justice space. I guess one last note we've talked about, and I think Ms. Drake hit this, how does what we do have cognizance of other things that might already be going on? I think that's important, and that should be part of scoping out each individual task force. Again, example from experience. So I had the opportunity to chair legislative interim committee on tax policy. A couple years ago, we set up this thing called the sales and use tax task force. Those two are pretty close. Some people deep in one or the other have said there ought to be better cognizance on the one hand of what the other is doing. That's right. We might even have to make some statutory tweaks about that. And that'll be evolving because there won't always be a task force X doing Y, but maybe next time there is. So I think we need to balance the right sideboards for the right outcomes that we all decide that we want with flexibility. And again, I know we'll unpack more on all that later, so I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Weissman. I'm going to go online to Tristan and then Director Hilke. Justin, if you'd like to weigh in, then we'll come back into the room to our chairs, and then we will take a brief break because I know I've kept everybody longer than the agenda had planned, but I thought it was important to go ahead and let folks kick off what will be the bulk of our conversation this afternoon. So Tristan, I'll invite you to share any reflections you'd like to.
Thank you. First, let me just check that everyone in the room can hear me.
We have you clearly. Thank you.
Thanks. So as far as high-level takeaways, I have been reflecting a lot on the name of this group and the fact that transforming criminal and juvenile justice necessarily means that whatever we do here cannot have the major effect of maintaining the status quo. So I've thought a lot about how to accomplish that. And what I've heard as a theme over and over again in testimony and while we've been at the table has been to listen to lived experience and community voices, as opposed to the over-reliance that we have always had in this policy area on systems actors, on institutional actors. And I certainly think that the listening sessions are a good idea. I'm wondering if we're looking to create an entity that is charged with proposing new policy solutions in order to transform the current systems that we have, if we shouldn't be creating an entity that the majority of its function is to go out into the community and gather ideas and hear from people who are directly impacted, hear from people who are survivors of crime or family members of victims of crime, rather than those who represent them in the system, to hear from people who are impacted by being policed and perhaps prosecuted and sentenced, rather than those who represent them. I'm reminded of what Ms. Houston from Rocky Mountain Victims Law Center testified to a couple of days ago, that a lot of times the voices from the systems drown out the voices of the folks that she represents. And I think that's exactly what we need to seek to avoid when we are making decisions about structure, composition, mission, as well as where entities should be housed. I agree with Rep. Weissman that it should not be housed in the Department of Public Safety, and I would point out putting it in the executive branch at all, I think goes against the idea of it being a policy-making entity that is tasked with transforming the current system. I think that if we want to talk about operations or rulemaking, implementation of policy, or otherwise enforcing the law, then the executive branch would be the appropriate branch to go to for that. But I think if it is actually about new ideas and policy making that would lead to legislation, then the appropriate place for that is the legislative branch. But again, I keep coming around to the idea that most of us are systems actors, and frankly, we have had a lot of voice and a lot of opportunity to participate in policymaking, to participate in stakeholder meetings. I think that law enforcement and prosecution and corrections and defense lawyers, we are pretty well represented in the legislative and policymaking process already. And I think what the focus has got to be on going forward, if we're going to transform anything at all, is getting to the people who are impacted by the policies that will be created and getting their input and the considerations of how they and their families and communities and their safety and sense of justice and trust in the system is going to be impacted. The only other point that I wanted to reiterate is the importance of keeping separate entities for the adult criminal legal system and the juvenile system. I certainly agree with Senator Gardner and everyone else who has made that point. And as far as high-level takeaways, that's what I've got.
Thank you, Tristan. And I think we're hearing a lot of conversations going to surface some deeper exploration. We've been pulling these threads together around whether we're calling it mission, we're calling it purpose, we're calling it what is the function of this entity or entities we're talking about. And we'll look to the chairs after this meeting for direction of whether we need to provide back to this group a better landscape look at the different types of boards, commissions, councils, and task forces that exist legislatively within departments or under boards and commissions, and if that would be helpful to you. But I want to bring in Director Hilke for your takeaways and reflections at this point, sir.
Thank you, Barrick. Appreciate that. I'll try to keep it short and sweet, but I think first of all, I just want to say that I'm struck by a lot of the testimony that we heard today. And I actually sort of wish that other outside of what was formerly the CCJJ, other people in the executive branch and the legislative branch, all elected officials could benefit from this, hearing from this, from the people that provided testimony to us. I have a document that was created by Office of Legislative Legal Services that shows all of the criminal justice reform bills for the last 10 or 12 years. It wasn't updated in 2023. But when you go through all of the bills and all the things that have passed, most all of them had nothing to do with CCJJ. Yet a lot of what would call frustration with or things that cause people a lot of frustration. They think it came from CCJJ, and it probably really didn't. So that's why I think it would be important, and it's sort of a missed opportunity for all of our public policy makers to be able to listen to this conversation. I've learned a lot from it. Just some mechanical things. As far as where it lives, I don't, having been the chair of the CCJJ for 10 years almost, it lived in our department. We staffed it. I don't have a strong opinion about that either way. I think the thing is that it just needs to make sure that we have the proper support, the proper staffing, the proper line item dollars for it, and an expert facilitation organization. I've already seen the benefit of what you're doing, Barrick, with your group and how you've recapped conversations and testimony. I think that is important for us as well. I heard a lot about the transparency and accessibility, particularly with people with access and functional needs, and the ability of where we house meetings and after hours meetings and all that. I would agree with all of that and welcome opportunities there. The issue about adult and juvenile and whether that should be separated. I do think whether it's two separate entities or two separate subgroups among parent agency parent entity is wise, because in the decade that I've been directly involved and in the time that I was involved as a sheriff, as a member or participant, I do find there's two different cultures there in how they deal with things, but they have to come together at some point. And that work can be done in many ways, but it has been terrifically difficult to get that done by the same group all the time. About membership, I've struggled to listen, and I still want to make sure that I continue to be open-minded. My definition of lived experience, I think Tom maybe expressed a little bit of this morning, but I would say that I could make a pretty compelling argument about my lived experience and seeing victims and dealing with people who have been criminal justice involved for almost 40 years now, and picking up the pieces of the wreckage of people's lives. I would consider all of that kind of thing lived experience. And I believe that I have ideas and philosophies about our criminal justice system that would also very much align with people who are formerly incarcerated as well. And I've seen people, that are high risk offenders that go to jail or go to prison, that buy their way out of jail, and people who are either low risk or medium risk that cannot buy their way out of jail and get further affected in the system. And I feel like that's a tragedy that we have yet to solve, even though we've done an enormous amount of work on it. I think at one point we heard, some comments about what is community. Community is a lot of different things, and we've heard from certainly members of one type of community, but maybe not members of other types of communities. I found it really interesting, the Boulder business people that provided testimony day before yesterday, how things are impacting their world as well. And I don't want to discount what they say, but it's something that we need to listen to as well. And I think there's lots of different communities. There are communities that, as you know, that want cash bond, that want, people to be incarcerated. And, I don't agree with that, but they're there and we have to listen to them. One thing I am concerned about, particularly about where this lives, and there was testimony previous to me today, and I can't remember who it was from, but how things need to be time limited during the session or whatever. We are going to have to really struggle with understanding how we come to decisions, because if we want consensus, the speed of consensus is not time compressed to a session, and it's going to be hard pressed to be time compressed into a summer sometimes, because you're talking about a formerly adversarial system with years and years and years of transgressions on each other. And it's been my experience, both as a sheriff when we were doing this work with with the federal government, the National Institute of Corrections, and the Evidence-Based Decision-Making Project, and in this world, that if you do want to get to consensus, it takes time. And I get why we want things to be time compressed so that we can get to decisions quicker, and we need to transform things faster. But that is a real contradiction, and it's a paradox that we're going to continue to struggle with. And how we may have to choose. We get to a point, and then have a system where we make a recommendation that not everybody's going to agree with. And I don't know how you get to that, but I want to make sure that we acknowledge that. Something that has always been, I found to be a tad bit awkward, as the chair of the commission formerly, is the tasking of the group. What ideas are we going to get tasked with, and how do we do that? We've had systems where the group itself went through a prioritization exercise to try to get it done. We created a new system at a previous sunset hearing where we did take direction from the governor, the legislative leadership, and the Supreme Court justice. That continues to be something that I think is really important, because you don't want to get off on something that may be less important than what is really the most important pressing matters for our state. And I think that we should put a little bit of thought and effort about how we get the tasking for the group. And then there's just things that I think that have been really difficult to hear, because there are explanations that I don't think people know. Take, for instance, the I can live with it vote. Tom can give you a bit of history here as well, but that was created in a way to try to allow legislators to be able to have the flexibility to vote for something, but not lock themselves into how their party and how they're going to vote on the floor. And so there were those kinds of things that were done. There was quite a bit of critical thought put into them, but they're easily discounted without a lack of understanding. And then finally, I'll just say, it is a bit ironic. I would love to figure out a way where we take the politics out of decision making, but you can't do that when you're under an executive order from an executive political person, and also have membership from legislative political people. And we're going to talk about putting it in one branch or the other. That is going to be a difficult challenge to do. And it is something that I think that we should endeavor to figure out how to minimize as much as we possibly can, but it is not going to be erased. Even the people that provide testimony here that are from community groups that have lived experience or previously incarcerated individuals, or the advocacy groups that represent them, go directly to their legislator to advocate. So it is a difficult thing that we're going to continue to struggle with, but we should try to endeavor to minimize it as much as possible. That's all I'll say for today. Those are just mostly mechanical and tactical things, but I think they're important to bring up. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Director. I'm going to go to, I don't know, Justin, if you wanted to offer any thoughts that you're passing along from Emily, I'll invite you in to share any quick takeaways.
Sure. Just very quickly. I really appreciate being able to join you all here today. This is a real honor, and I'm glad that Emily asked me to participate as her proxy. With that said, I haven't had the benefit of everyone here, specifically hearing all the testimony, collecting all the data. I've only really gotten the materials that were shared yesterday afternoon and this morning, and then a brief discussion with Emily. So I can only share her high level thoughts based on that here. And the main takeaways that Emily has had so far, and that Rocky Mountain Victim Law Center would have so far, based on everything that we've heard, or that whether it's two arms with one oversight of a body, or two completely separate entities, it's clear that the intricacies of either the adult criminal justice system or the juvenile criminal justice system require that those be handled separately. Membership specifically, it seems like one of the things that was difficult with the CCJJ was the size. So whether however many entities come out of this process, that membership number needs to be smaller to allow for effective discussion and negotiation. As far as community participation, we feel very strongly, and Emily feels very strongly, that survivor representation is important. And that would be some survivor who has participated in the criminal justice system, had access to rights under the Victims' Rights Act, and has experienced what that feels like to go through the process, all the way, from victimization through the way that survivors and victims are treated by the system. That's pretty much the main takeaways that I've been able to glean from just a few hours of preparation over the last day or so. So thank you for letting me speak and listening.
We appreciate that. And we know that was a ton of information that we threw at everybody. I'm going to bring it back into the room and ask our chairs to close out this session. I do just want to name, we've got a little over a dozen members of the public online. We will have opportunity for public comment if you want to address this group at 12:45, regardless of where we are in the agenda. I will pause us to allow members of the public who would like to speak. If you would, I would ask that you'd shoot us a message in the chat as we get closer to that time so we know. With that, I'll hand it over to Chair Rains and then Chair Kane.
Thank you. I'm not going to dive into the specific topic areas. I think everybody has eloquently pointed out everything we've heard and need to consider. So I'm going to start with, I guess, maybe a little humor. I don't think anybody who knew me in government class in high school or in my late teens or early 20s would ever fathom this moment, that I'm sitting here in this position, and would perhaps be aghast by it. But here I am. And when I endeavor to work in this arena, I always pull myself back to those lessons, though, and fundamentally, where do we start, and what has always been defined as essentially the four main purposes of government: establish laws, maintain order and security, protect citizens from external threats, and promote the general welfare by providing public services. Madison then kind of jumped on that and said, but there are things reserved to the states. And essentially, he always called those the police powers, which we then trickle down and say public safety. That's the term that we wrestle with lately. And what does that mean? And I'm going to piggyback on Vincent's comments, because I think he did a tremendous job trying to redefine how we look at public safety. And I'm probably shocking him, but I agree with much of it, because I think part of the mission here is to reassess, redefine, stay true to public safety, but make sure we really understand what it encompasses. And it ranges, obviously, I'm interested in crime prevention, but fundamental fairness, address disparity and inequities, as Jason commented on, mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse, education, community health, family support. All of this is public safety. And so I don't think the framers were wrong. And I think they allowed the latitude for that definition to grow, and we need to adopt it, I think, as we move forward. So, the pitfalls and perils that we've learned from CCJJ, absolutely. I could list kind of the same in my experience in the legislature. I'll be honest, I'm not a true fan of either the legislative branch or the executive branch having significant influence over anything we do. I think their input is necessary and valuable, but I have seen instances both in interim committees and within the CCJJ where things were a little contrived. And so I hope to avoid that. But beyond that, I'm going to withhold comment on all of the specific breakouts until we dive into them individually. So I think we can create the unicorn. I'll work on adopting the new term. I might get that T-shirt though, Captain Agency. I like that. But thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much to everybody for your thoughts. I thought that was really valuable to let everybody talk. I got to say, as someone who was there at the creation of CCJJ, and, you know, obviously it was a stakeholder-driven legislative, you know, a bill. But, you know, 15 years ago, when I sat with Sheriff Grayson Robinson from Arapahoe County and said, hello, and we talked about collateral consequences, and he said, I never thought about that before, you know, what happens, or, you know, when I, you know, from my jail and that impact, and, you know, met the chairman of the parole board, and the DOC people were there, and then the Attorney General, at that time, John Suthers was attending, and there was this group of people that were like, hello, how are you? They had never met. You know, the DOC, I don't think Andre's on, I'm not sure Andre's on, but, you know, sometimes we would talk about parole and reentry, and it'd be like, DOC, have you met the head of the parole board? Because you guys are in different worlds. So there was a value at that time that has become outdated. And as we look at this, I am struck by the similarity between, say, the victim survivor testimony and the community impacted, formerly incarcerated, both saying, hey, we want to be there. We feel ignored. And so it's that commonality that I think we need to address as we move forward and create the unicorn that Tom is imagining. And I hope it's pink. Just saying. Okay. Thank you.
I'm excited about all the commitment to unicorns here. And more importantly, frankly, to Colorado continuing to what we've done with the CCJJ and on a lot of areas is not saying, well, the rest of the country hasn't figured it out. And instead saying, why doesn't the rest of the country look to what we do here in Colorado? With that, after I dragged us fairly past our original agenda, it's 11:05. I'm going to ask that we take a break for everybody to stretch legs, check in where you need to, and let's kick back off at 11:15 sharp. And at that point, I'm going to have the chair start taking us into the deep dive conversations on some of the specific topics. So thank you all. Members online, we will be back at 11:15. Is going to be rejoining us in a moment. For those online, we are back in session at the TCJJ January 5th meeting. Again, a reminder to members of the public that we will have opportunity if you'd like to speak to this group. We'll have public comment at 12:45. We'll pause the agenda then. If you would like to address this group during that period, I would ask that you drop us a message in the chat so we can be sure to be aware that you are there. At this point, I want to do a couple things. One, I want to thank everybody for indulging what was kind of an evolving agenda this morning. We know that we've spent a few weeks, I think it's been close to 10 cumulative hours of you being talked at. And that's not a bad thing. It's been a good thing, I think, for us to hear from 50 plus perspectives of people outside of this room who haven't historically been at that table. And we allowed the conversation this morning to go a little longer and more in depth because we've been asking you to intake and process so much that we wanted to get that back onto the table. Now what we're going to do, though, is start the deep dive. Now we are going to go all the way down into the weeds. And I was talking with the chair during the break a little bit. It seems that a lot of the questions may start to get addressed as we talk about what really is the fundamental purpose of the new entity or entities that the executive order charged this group with creating and structuring. What is the purpose? What is its why? And for the sake of using the language that's aligned, what is its mission? Because that may start to answer some of the operational and structural issues. but thought we'd start this with the open discussion. And in this case, I'm going to flip it around a little bit. Number one, I am going to first call on the chairs. And number two, I'm not going to start by calling on everybody until I don't see any hands up. And then those sitting on their hands, I will be calling on you. But I'm going to ask Chair Kane to kick us off as we talk about mission or missions of the one or multiple entities. Your thoughts based on your past experience and with what we've been hearing.
Okay, so I was scribbling on, and we'll do this really casually here, but I was kind of scribbling and looking at some of the missions in the other states and trying to think through, because I think when I looked at CCJJ's statutory mandate, they had an overarching mission, and then there were duties. And we'll get to that, more specifics of areas of concentration. But I liked what Utah said, which was the mission to connect and collaborate. But they talked with system stakeholders. And I thought it would be best to connect and collaborate with communities and system stakeholders, because that's what the group would do, with the goal of promoting evidence-based policies that promote the health and safety of persons affected by the criminal and juvenile justice systems or something. I haven't worked out that kind of language there. And then if we pick two, if we have an oversight and juvenile and criminal underneath oversight, we could separate, we could have it be in one. If we do two separate, then one just refers to juvenile and one just refers to criminal. Yeah, I prefer, I'm just gonna, just talk off the top of my head. I don't like using the word criminal justice system, and we have gotten to use the word criminal legal system more commonly. And the reason is that I'm not sure there's any justice anywhere along the line from day one. It's kind of like assuming that conviction brings a victim justice is contrary to my core belief system, because it was unjust from day one, and conviction, it's a punishment system. It's an accountability system. I'm not sure it's a justice system. It may be a legal system. So I struggle with using that term. And so as we get from a mission, I hope we try to stay away from that, because I don't think that's fair to people involved, and I don't think that's fair to victims to assume that somehow this system will give them justice. So those are my initial thoughts, and anybody who has another, idea about what the mission would be.
And
Tom, you want to go?
I'm not too far apart from Maureen. I worry about, and you've heard me say it a few times now, I don't want to be trapped by words, phrases de jure, silos. So I worry about things like systems people, community, and can we just use a broader, all-inclusive, whether, I'm not a huge fan of stakeholder, but something that is more inclusive there rather than trying to pigeonhole specific groups. Because the whole objective here, and what I think I heard all morning was, we need to make sure we hear from everyone in order to better form and collaborate and recommend a path forward to promote, and again, in my mind, the redefined notion of public safety. And it's probably dangerous to just use that word without expounding on it a little bit. But generally, public safety, again, as an all-inclusive, more inclusive, broader term than it's been bandied around in this building for decades. So if we could somehow morph those two concepts into something like Utah's phraseology, I'm kind of a fan of that. I don't share the cynicism of justice. I don't want to dive into what Plato and Aristotle thought justice was, but I have a more optimistic view on what we try to do. Certainly there are punitive aspects. A lot of it's accountability, and we can always talk about that. But I'm not too
Yeah.
far from my colleague here.
Right. Well, health and safety was what Vera said, and that's what I rang because I think it incorporates safety, not saying public safety, which is kind of the term for law enforcement. Law enforcement is what makes the public safe. And I don't think law enforcement is what makes the public safe. Again, say, healthcare, schools, after school program, those make the public safe. But safety is a core issue, but health is also got to be a core issue.
Yeah, I want to be
Um,
careful there, Maureen,
yeah.
because I don't want to draw those chasms. To the
Okay.
person calling in the middle of the night who's getting their house shot up, law enforcement is safety. So
Can be.
I just think we have to be careful with that. I do think we can bifurcate, public safety and make it a broader term, whether it's a community, and I hear you,
Right.
but I do want to be careful with saying this isn't that or this is that.
And as we open it up to the floor, what I want to challenge this group, speak to a sixth grader. I think it's very easy, and we will have plenty of time to wordsmith this and make it sound, whether it's bureaucratic or very embracing. I think when we talk about mission, let's get down to really what is the vision? What is the fundamental purpose? What is that mission of whether it is one combined with two arms to it or the two entities? If you were speaking to your sixth grader, what would you tell them is the fundamental mission of this organization when this group gets it right for Colorado's future? And I want to continue to invite our members, Tristan and Director Hilke online to raise your hands. But members in the room, when you think about what should be the mission of one or more bodies, how do you break that down in its simplest? What should it be accomplishing? Rep. Weissman, please.
Trying to keep it simple, to contribute toward a Colorado where fewer people, for any reason, commit a crime in the first instance, that those who do commit crimes are punished in an appropriate, proportional, and non-disparate way, and that Director Williams would always say this: successful reentry starts not when you walk out, but when you walk in, and that if somebody does commit a crime that they are punished for, that it is that person's last time.
Thank you, Rep. Weissman. And I'll invite people and encourage you, think broadly about justice itself, and think, are there unique aspects of the mission of criminal justice and juvenile justice? And I'm using those words because they're what's in the executive order. But are there unique missions of either or those elements that carry across? Senator Gardner, please.
Thank you. And more, I mean, really simple. I think to break it down, the goal of the entity or entities should be to make the best and most effective public policy recommendations for criminal and juvenile justice to the Colorado General Assembly with a recommendation for passage of those proposals. And all that other stuff about evidence-based and all of that is in there, but at the end of the day, the mission, the thing, the rubber to the road, the on-target thing is to do that.
Right. I'm going to jump in and maybe we can do crosstalk here a little bit, but I think that when you said make the best and effective public policy, we should say clearly whether the purpose is to try to make policy. It's just not a study group. It is to make policy for Colorado to implement, through passage of a bill or change in executive, administrative practices or whatever. But I do think capturing that is a good idea.
And I think that that's a great point that as you think about this, what is your theory of action? And I don't want to get too academic on it, but is it that the theory of action is that by enacting and making recommendations for the best policy, that advances the purpose of this body? Is it that by coordinating amongst, you're able to do those things? what is both the theory of action, what is the role you see playing, and how does that play out in the mission of these bodies, and any nuances between adult and juvenile? While I'm comfortable with awkward silence, I'm also comfortable with calling on people. And I'm going to give a heads up that while I'll call on folks in the room first, Director Hilke and Tristan, you're just in my eyesight as well. Janet, I'm going to call you in here and just get your thoughts at the most fundamental level. What should be the mission and purpose of one or more of these?
Well, I like where we're headed so far. Something that I'm struggling with is something that Director Hilke mentioned, and that is that the CCJJ, I think, had some challenges around getting its direction, and it was turned into a bit of a political tool or weapon, depending on your perspective. But it was subject to the will of, in the last few years, I think, what the governor wanted. And I think it does sort of beg the question to me whether the public policy recommendations are the way to move forward. I don't know the exact answer to this. And the challenge that I'm also having with it is to the point that I think Senator Gardner made, that if we look back at all of the criminal justice legislation that's happened over the last, our recent history, some really significant work was done by CCJJ, but a lot of that work was not done by CCJJ. And even lawmakers who were on CCJJ circumvented that process to run their own bills. So I think we need to be honest about whether this new entity that we are hoping to form will be the policy driver of criminal and juvenile justice, or whether it's just one methodology for doing that and how it syncs up with other systems.
I appreciate it. Rep. Weissman. And then this is where I'm going to give people a little heads up instead of just calling you. I'm going to go to Rep. Weissman, and then I want to bring in a mix of perspectives and professional experiences. So Sheriff, I'm going to come to you, and then Vincent, and then Director Hilke, I'm going to call on you on this question of what is the mission? What is the purpose? And where does this body fit into the ecosystem? Rep. Weissman.
Thank you, Barrick.
Good question.
You know, I have a pretty strong opinion to the question maybe that Ms. Drake just posed, but I'll try to broaden the answer into the mission question. I think one way to respond to what the mission should be is to be a source of input or ideas for legislation that the General Assembly should pass. And to Senator Gardner's point, I think if we posit that it should be the sole source, we've broken the legs of anything that we set up out of the gate. The idea that CCJJ ought to be sort of the source, and that anything that came from it was presumptively just more legitimate than anything that came from any duly elected legislator who had raised his or her hand and taken an oath in the Constitution to represent his or her constituency. That is not in the text of the former CCJJ statute, and I'm not ascribing that mentality to any person here, but that idea had grown up around the former CCJJ, and it was one of the most profoundly problematic things that had grown up around the former entity. And I think that we need to be mindful of that, and we need to back very far away from that. I want systems, structures, groups, something to go and listen and bring perspectives to the 100 of us in here that we might not otherwise have, to channel experiences, plural, from communities, plural, and to make us better at what we're supposed to do, the 100 of us, which is be representative of the 6 million other souls that we are bound to represent. But again, I'm a legislator. You know, maybe, okay, you have a hammer, you see nails. I don't even love that metaphor in this context, but I think that we have to be fundamentally informing the legislative process and not trying to set up something in opposition to it, or that is going to be utilized to delegitimate it. say we've had a 18-month work group on, all right, let's just say reentry, because that was recently being discussed. And out of that process comes, you know, there's a fine line here, but out of that process comes some proposal and it's reduced to writing in the form of a bill. Stands to reason to me that there's some imprimatur behind that. That's kind of the whole point. That does not detract from the ability of any of my colleagues to use one of their 5 bills to try to legislate into that space. Now, they may have an uphill case to make, because if they're doing something other than 250 people had input into all across the state for 18 months. But I just want to amplify that this idea that you didn't go through CCJJ, therefore, you shouldn't even be introduced, or you should get killed in committee, or how dare you. That was a real big problem around here, and we cannot repeat it.
Thank you, Rep. Weissman.
I think the representative makes a good point. Kind of another perspective on that. The way perhaps it was arguably weaponized at times on either side of the equation, frankly. I mean, we can point to examples either way. Could be diluted conceivably by this group, but frankly, there is a benefit and a strength in if a group like this does make a recommendation. It shouldn't be a bar to legislators, but it would certainly be relevant in the public testimony that we understand what you're asking for, but by the way, this carefully put together group of subject matter experts think to the contrary. And I'm not sure how we do that, Mike, in terms of making that not turn into, and because you're not listening to them, you have no value. But yeah, it's a needle to thread.
And I just want to name a couple things that I've heard, and then we're going to continue going around. And I think it's important to note them. Mike, a lot of what we have heard has been the role of this future body informing policy with the capital P as adopted by the legislature. I heard that, informing it. It's a source of information. Folks have talked about it's gathering perspectives from the community to bring to that legislative process. And I asked this question, not intending at all for it to be leading, but is that the sole or primary purpose of any future body, is to inform legislation? Does it have other roles? How does it act? And I think, Tom, to what you just raised, there's a lot of places where words do matter. And when we talk about it is a body making some recommendations, or it is viewed as an authority, it is viewed as a wide-reaching and diverse body. And I think there can be both how we describe it in its mission to serve that way, and how it's perceived because of the duties and the structure that you all put together. But I hope we'll continue to explore what are the different purposes that it forms. And I invite people to raise their hands. I'm also going to start calling on some people. And Sheriff, I would love to tag you in, and then Vincent, and then Director Hilke, just because I think the folks have touched on some things you all have touched on. Sheriff, when you think about what should be the mission, and are they discrete or overlapping when it comes to adult and juvenile?
So when I think about, So when I think about mission, I think more broadly, because we had talked about going a little wider, that a group that's dedicated to advancing a fair, just, and compassionate criminal justice system that prioritizes fairness, rehabilitation, and the overall well-being of individuals and communities. So that's more broader scope. And then you can talk about promoting equity. You can talk about empowering rehabilitation. You can talk about protecting human rights. You can talk about community engagement, youth-centric approaches, policy advocacy, and education and raising awareness. When I think about structure, well, first of all, I have to say, I also agree with Tom. Like, we've got to get away from all these names we're calling each other, both sides, system actors, community, whatever it is. Jesus, we got to get away from these names. Because I don't think, as long as we all have these labels on each other, this group will never get anywhere.
Appreciate it.
But I just want to say about structure, I still believe in, as Maureen had said, and a few people have said about this, parent structure with juvenile and criminal justice being total separate underneath this parent structure.
And for clarification, does the parent do the coordinating between those where
I
necessary?
think everything filters up as I see
Yep.
it. You know what I mean? Like those groups do the work and it filters up to the parent group, like this group, for instance. And then we start making some decisions or legislative recommendations based on the work of those groups.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Oh, God. It's all in parts and pieces.
We may have you email it to us
Uh,
as well if we can get you to.
Yeah, why don't I do that? I'll email it.
Oh,
Whatever the group is dedicated, whatever the group's name is, dedicated to advancing a fair, just, and compassionate criminal justice, criminal and juvenile justice system that prioritizes fairness, rehabilitation, and the overall well-being of individuals and communities.
Thank you, Sheriff. And for right now, that's where I really want to push this group. Let's not go down into the weeds on the how, the tactics. Let's talk about the what, the why. Why should this exist? What is its mission or purpose? Vincent, you want to jump in?
Sure. So I think that, a couple of comments. I agree regarding the remarks about systems actors versus others with lived experience, because I see that many systems actors are very much informed by their own lived experience and don't recognize that as a valid distinction. Systems actors often have an expertise and a breadth of perspective that an individual with a lived experience does not have. And so stakeholders may be the better word there or something. I think that justice, I hear Maureen's and very much feel her sense that when we say a criminal justice system, we're giving credit to something for something that is not evidently there, or else we wouldn't be trying to transform it. There is some need for transformation, but also want to acknowledge Tom's attachment to justice, but because justice is what is aspirational for us as members of a human community, it is always going to elude us as members of a human community because we do not have omniscience. We're always going to be fallible. So our justice is always aspirational. So to embrace the aspiration to justice as part of the mission so that the work has always got that momentum and impetus to carry on toward justice, and to make those policy recommendations, but not as a gatekeeper, that acknowledging that policy that is valid will come from all different directions, and to make recommendations for policy that contains both recommendations regarding preventative interventions that reduce reliance upon public safety interventions in correctional systems, and also recommendations that improve the efficacy and equity of the judiciary and correctional systems that aim to preserve safety and promote successful reintegration into the community, into least restrictive settings with the greatest expediency as possible. And then with regard to the adult and juvenile thing, with Sheriff Fitzsimons, I would say that there should be a parent entity or whatever, the captain agency, the unicorn that is aspiring to justice and acknowledging that the adult and juvenile strands of that are ill-formed and need to be objects for ongoing work, and so would feed up into that for decision-making.
Thank you. And I don't want people to think that I'm calling on anybody out of any favoritism because I'm going to call on everybody. So if I'm skipping you, it doesn't mean you're my favorite. Director Hilke, because some of your comments and the past of TCJJ were referenced, I want to bring you in and your thoughts at that most fundamental level on the purpose and the mission of this body. What should it exist to do?
Well, I'm going to follow the senator's lead and just in the simplest form. I believe the purpose and the existence of any group like this is to make public policy recommendations to the public policy makers that are in the best interest of the state of Colorado. We heard a lot of testimony from previous people, and then also we heard sort of from the members of the TCJJ today talk about which pieces of the system, needed to do what. If we make good public policy recommendations about any of those topics, we've committed our mission. I do agree that with Rep. Weissman with regards to, the CCJJ became a shield or a sword for both sides. It could have been the shield for one side on one issue, but depending on the content, it would have been a shield on the other side. And same for a sword. And I don't believe that it needs to be the exclusive way that public policy needs to be made. I've never subscribed to that idea. Never thought that a legislator did not have the opportunity to, to try to influence public policy in a different way. I do, though, acknowledge the point that Tom was trying to make, is that when the CCJJ or the TCJJ or whatever we call it in the future does tackle an item, particularly a big item, if you say we have a reentry subcommittee, reentry is a big deal, and it's a big encompassing component with a lot of subcomponents, is that there has to be, it doesn't lock a legislator into a certain vote by any means, but there has to be a certain amount of deference. And that deference should be towards the fact that this group has wrestled with this and presented, a recommendation that comes from a process that is listened to people and we made the very best decision to the closest amount of consensus that is possible. And that deference should be given to that. I've seen things come out that way and then go into another working group at a legislative level or whatever, where then it becomes, as our friend from the, when she formerly worked for the ACLU said, it became into a Frankenstein bill. And, then it became something different. And we got to figure out how to sort of prioritize what the if the group comes to a recommendation, there really should be strong deference to following that recommendation.
Thank you, Director Hilke. And I think, there may be some language that gets incorporated when we talk about what is this body's role as a voice, an authority, a respected body. What happens when this body does do the hard work of putting one of those recommendations forward? I'm going to open it up to the floor before I just start calling on people again. But I want to make sure everybody in this group has a chance to weigh in on this really base level. What should this group exist to do? What is its mission? Jason, jump in, please.
All right. So I believe that there's like real dignity and simplicity. And the more and more I sit here and listen to this, the goal or the mission from my perspective should be to, you say, explain it to your 6-year-old, figure out what's working and fix what's not working. And I guess if we were to elevate that to a senior, it would be to, this group of people will provide recommendations or legislative recommendations that will make significant sweeping overhaul changes to the criminal justice and the juvenile justice system, and focusing on, I don't think the word justice should be taken out. Focus on justice and also focus on addressing inequity. I think that the reason I picked those two is because in some ways, inequities nowadays, folks feel as though justice is being served, whereas justice is being served, some feel that inequities are happening. And I think that our goal or the mission should be in the name of the work group or whatever work group, committee, whatever you call it.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Debbie, and then I'm going to come back across to Ubaldo, and then I'm going to go online to Tristan for thoughts. And then I'm going to ask our chairs to kind of react and reflect to what they're hearing from the group as a whole. And then if people are feeling we're in a good moving place, we may start talking about what feels like a segue into operations and what that structure may look like. But Debbie and then Mr. Chavez, please.
So I had a question, and my question is, Maureen, you said that this was a permanent entity, correct?
That's in the executive order.
Okay. So based on that, to focus on improving laws is limited. What I think we have is a dual purpose. One is to improve the laws that are in existence and make things better. The other is to look at our systems that create the injustices that create folks going, oh, right. So that's what I think.
Thank you, Debbie. Mr. Chavez.
Thank you. I think I want to agree with the simplicity that Jason brought up and add on to what Debbie said is I think about our system and how many folks over the years I've talked to that said it's broken. And I don't want to say it's broken because I think we have a good foundation. But I think that it's tired. I think that it's injured, and I think that it's flailing. And so I think the mission, with that in perspective, really should be on culture change. We should focus on developing new innovative mechanisms for that change, and then also focus on reform and improvement. And if it's going to be a parenting body, which I'm a little concerned with, because I feel like, does that inevitably become political? And then, runs that gambit and ends up with the same outcome as the CCJJ of becoming stagnant, and then 10 or 15 years from now needing to be changed again. Does it need to be a bunch of smaller groups with liaisons? But I also believe that it's going to end up being that way. There's going to be an overarching commission. So, can we create some fail safes to make sure that it doesn't become a gatekeeper? And then I think to have real change, we have to have some legislative power, or that entity or group of entities has to have that, or at least that legislative influence, because that's the only way that we're going to get things through, right? But I believe, if we focus on that culture shift, I think that can be at least the cap or very powerful piece of improving and making change. And then if we keep it simple and just evolve and work on improving the good things and then getting rid of what's not working, I think that group of entities or entity can really establish some lasting change.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Tristan, and then Victoria. I don't think I had called you in yet, so I'm going to call you right after I get to Tristan. Tristan, your thoughts on at this really base level. What is your idea for the mission and purpose going forward of this new permanent body or bodies?
Well, I think if we're going to have entities that recommend policy change and recommend legislation, like I said before, I keep coming back to the transforming idea. So I think that it needs to be set up as an entity to seek out new ideas and new approaches. And I agree with what I've heard here already, that it should be focused on crime prevention rather than just reaction to crime. Looking at root causes and stopping crime before it is actually committed is the only way to prevent the creation of new victims. It's also the only way to keep kids and adults, frankly, out of the system and keep those negative impacts from ripping apart families and having negative impacts on communities. So I think it should be a seat for transformational change, for new evidence-based approaches, and to focus on prevention rather than being reactive.
Thank you, Tristan. And Victoria, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think thinking about how the formation of the future TCJJ should should enable growth, thinking of how the values of the Colorado community have changed when CCJJ was first born to today, anticipating that those values will probably change in the future. Maybe, and I don't know what the rules are on writing mission statements, but maybe lacking specificity and being more broad can give some lifespan to the mission of it. So what I've drafted is very boring relative to what everyone else has put together, but also thinking of kind of what Director Hilke was saying in regard to, and what we've really kind of talked about with this group of, maybe the tenet or the foundation of this committee or entity will be to bring together lots of different entities as kind of a parent. I think collaboration should definitely be a focus term or an important term in the mission statement. And what I've got here is facilitate the collaborative construction of reform legislation across interested stakeholders in Colorado. And again, very boring, but I think specifying what types of reforms, the aim of those reforms, what stakeholders would be present in those, may be narrowing the lens a bit, not necessarily for today, but like for tomorrow. So those are just my thoughts.
Thank you. I'm going to ask our chairs to reflect a bit on what they've heard, and we will probably then move into some discussion on the operation side and potentially the structure. I want to name a few things. We could probably have this very conversation for another 10 hours. We also have a charge by the executive to have a report here in the next 60 days, making this group's recommendations. So there's going to be some work that goes in distilling your thoughts and input and bringing drafts for you all to react to. I was hearing in all of this, though, some different ideas of legislative power and authority versus legislative influence and credibility. I was hearing about policy making versus system and culture change. We're talking about criminal justice or reaction versus prevention. And is it additive? I don't think it's an either or, but some of the things that I've been hearing, and Maureen or Tom, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm curious, as you've listened to this group, are there things that have been ahas for you?
Man, there's, I think in any mission, simplicity and breadth is important, but it's hard with this one. I like where Senator Gardner was going with the brevity. I like the inclusion of some of the terminology I heard from several others about, concerns over terminology. Obviously, that you're hearing me say that's a concern of mine. I just submitted something that I rewrote. I'm wondering if we shouldn't ask you to, I don't know, to collate those, and anybody who didn't really actually structure a statement, give them the time to send you a structured statement that we could all look at over the next few days. I know as I listened to people, I reworded what I was writing because I picked up so many good ideas from all of you. I do think it's potentially the most significant thing we do is define this mission, and it will guide us where we go on the other buckets.
And to that point, yes, I would, and I see yours in my inbox. I would invite everybody. Send to me, or you can just send it to Carrie and me. If you have draft, and whether it's fully baked or you just have some bullets, and we will consolidate that into a mutually accessible and collaborative document people can access. Maureen, any thoughts?
No, that was what I was going to say. I would ask people to put in writing and send in what they thought, and then we can try to work and melt together the concepts. And I don't think we're not all in different spaces. I think we're in common space, but choosing words, this is where words will be important. And so I think if, my experience in working with organization, it takes some time to draft and redraft a mission, a statutory mission, as well as just a mission statement. So if we can do that, then we can go into our discussions about other issues.
Great. So I'll invite everybody. So, and I see half a dozen in my inbox. Thank you. Please keep sending those. I'm going to move us into the operations side, which is going to include structure. And I'm going to do a little bit of a straw poll. I want to emphasize this is nothing binding. This is just to kind of get a temperature of where we are. But I want to see where we are on the fundamental structure of the entity or entities. And as I'm hearing from all of you, and I want you to push back if I'm missing something, there's really three directions this can go. There can be a single commission on criminal and juvenile justice, and that one body with common membership addresses all issues. There can be, you could recommend two entirely separate entities that may meet in a lunchroom, but they exist independently. Or there can be a single umbrella body with subgroups within it, and we don't need to get into all of the details, but one entity that has bodies within it that one addresses adult, one addresses juvenile, and those both leave open the potential for different forms of short, time-fixed, subject-limited subcommittees or task forces within it. And I want to just do a quick temperature check to see, is there, and by a show of hands, if I can ask you to raise your hand, if your present inclination is that there should simply be one body with one set of members that address all issues, criminal and juvenile. Is there anybody that feels strongly that that is the direction to go? And neither in the room nor online. Vincent, please. Yeah. Yeah, you think there should be a single addressing all bodies or all issues?
Well, so I'm not clear, because if there's a single captain, and underneath the captain, two separate commissions. Juvenile and
That's
adult.
another choice.
Yeah, so that's
another
choice.
choice.
Choice one is one entity
Choice
only.
one is there is only one body with one, they do everything. Choice two is two totally disconnected groups that may informally collaborate. Choice three being one umbrella captain with the two bodies within it.
Yeah, if we could, because if I understand choice three, it's what I want.
I
Which
think
is
so, but I want to open this to some
Captain
conversation.
agency broken into adult and juvenile, with adult and juvenile having the ability to create their own working groups underneath on specific topics.
That would be the option three that I've been hearing
Okay.
so far. Rep Weissman and then Vincent.
Thank you. I don't know if I need to call this 3.5 or what. I think there's really broad agreement. We just demonstrated it, that adult and juvenile are different. But within juvenile, there are, just to pick on that for a minute, there are differences. Juvenile sentence structure versus juvenile diversion versus juvenile reentry versus school to prison pipeline, you're not necessarily going to have the same groups. So,
Right.
I mean, frankly, going back to the spring, I've been hearing we got to get more daylight between juvenile and adult for all the reasons that have been said. But as we've gone through many of these meetings now and heard from people, my current thinking is it's not as simple as adult versus juvenile. And in fact, if we fall into that duality, then that leads our thinking toward structures that, frankly, I think there's been some testimony against. So another concept is, let's call it a captain agency. And then within the multiplicity of different time-limited mission-centric task forces that might come into being over a decade, involving different people, quarterbacked by the captain agency, we definitely need to respect the adult versus juvenile distinction. It would be error to convene one task force that mixes the two up, I think. But it might also be error to say there's going to be this one group that is all things juvenile, because juvenile is a lot of different things. And likewise adult.
Yeah, and Yeah, I agree. Obviously, all things adult is going to have multiple task forces. All things juvenile is going to have multiple task forces. My only concern about doing that is then we get to the argument about membership of the captain agency and whether or not that's balanced in terms of adult and juvenile, and whether that's fair because you have people voting on things that they know nothing about. So Tom has some ideas about that, I know, but that's my concern. If you do one oversight, we're going to get the same pushback we got of the lack of juvenile actors as members of CCJJ.
I do.
I want to bring you in, and without going all the way into member composition, but
Yeah.
respecting that.
I do think there is a way to ameliorate that power concern. And I think a lesson learned from CCJJ is maybe the voting authority and the final determination was arguably backwards. As I look at it in retrospect, and when we're talking about these subgroups, I could see this remedied by the voting process in terms of how recommendations move forward. For instance, a working group on age of prosecution in the juvenile realm. If that working group voted this up to the juvenile group, that juvenile group would vote. And I was just thinking that if that was kind of the predominant vote, so that, yes, there's a captain agency, but I don't see that they should have the ability to kill the expertise of the juvenile group unless there's a super majority no vote from that captain agency. And maybe that's how you balance that kind of some of the criticisms, and they came from all sides in the commission, in the final commission vote. And Maureen and I have talked about it. Senator Gardner was there, Representative Weissman there. I mean, just candidly, there were some of those votes with 29 people where about 6 of us knew what was going on. And everybody's looking, how are they voting? How are they voting? And you take away that power from the ones who really aren't engaged or subject matter experts at the top level.
And I'm already sensing that this group may in the coming weeks get pretty far into the weeds on recommendations for structural vote thresholds, super majorities, even quorums on some of this. I would love to get everybody in here on the big picture structure. Do we have pretty broad consensus around the idea that there should be one umbrella that addresses juvenile and adult issues separately, while recognizing we've got a rolling set of topics that may sit within one or the other? Or are there other hybrids? And Rep. Weissman, I'm going to get back to you in 1 second. I think I saw Debbie's hand and Jason, and then I'll come, Vincent, and then I'll get back to you, Rep. Weissman.
I like the word oversee as opposed to, what was the word that you just used? That this body would oversee what was happening and be a facilitator to promote further laws going forward, that kind of thing, as opposed to being the final say. I don't know if you have to have a final say from the committee. If you do, then what Tom said about having the going with the recommendation from the quote unquote subcommittee, but this body would be would oversee the direction of what was happening.
Thank you. We go to Jason, then Vincent, then back over here to Rep. Weissman, and anybody else who wants to jump in.
I think that the two should say be segregated, totally segregated. And I don't know that having an overarching approval or group would help, because I feel that it would create limits, and I feel that there would be gatekeeping. And I think that there are experts that truly probably understand both systems, but there really are experts that understand juvenile justice, and there really are experts that understand criminal justice. And ultimately, I feel that having an overarching group, we could quite possibly limit the innovation that could be created. I like the captain thing. I really like the unicorn thing. And like the goal is to really do something that hasn't been done before. And if we're going to do that, I think we have to recognize that juvenile matters are separate than adult matters. And when I look at the structure of the juvenile, I think that, and I'm not from Colorado, but I believe that the juvenile justice was under the DOC, but then moved to Department of Human Services. And for whatever reason, so it's separate systems now, but I don't want us to recognize that it's so segregated that without prevention efforts that folks are talking about, that kid that's sitting at the foot center in Arapahoe County can end up at the Colorado State Penitentiary. So, there has to be an understanding of both systems. I just don't know that they should, for the purposes of creating policy, I think that they should be segregated.
And I just want to, pick your brain a little bit on that. And if you don't have a strong opinion, that's fine. As I'm understanding, two separate would be because of the unique attributes. And you're suggesting not an oversight body or the one that controls it. Do you see some structure of coordination between them where there is a committee that is members of both to coordinate? Is that more informal, or how would you see avoiding the silo risk?
What I put earlier in my previous statements was an intermediary between the two. Not a controlling intermediary, but just maybe like this subject matter expert that can understand the intricacies of both and ultimately be able to just be there as an advisor. But as far as both groups, they have equal decision making, they have equal policy implementation, they have equal influence, share and share alike. But as far as, one influencing the other, I think that though they have similarities, they're very different. That's what I'm saying. But that intermediary would be key and they have to be unbiased and they have to be willing to, share. They have to be invaluable with regard to knowledge, in informing the juvenile justice in the adult system. So last thing, the juvenile justice is looking at the future and trying to prevent an individual from being involved in the criminal justice. The criminal justice is kind of like this back to the future kind of thing, where they're looking in the rearview mirror and they're like, if we would have implemented blah, blah, blah in 1987, wow, we wouldn't have had this situation and this individual wouldn't be having a life sentence. So it's these two, though very different, if one could look to the future and one could look back, I think that we could come to a better enhanced juvenile justice and criminal justice system in Colorado.
Thank you. I appreciate you indulging me probing on that. I think I'm seeing a lot of nods of insight. Vincent, I want to invite you in, and then Rep. Weissman, and then Maureen.
I'm just, so many of you have so much more expertise about the differences between adult and juvenile systems than I do. And I just look at it from this person-centric, holistic perspective of today, the 13-year-old is considered a juvenile unless they've done X, Y, or Z, in which case they're part of the adult system. And then tomorrow, the 18-year-old who was yesterday's 13-year-old is now an adult, but it's that same individual set of conditions and preconditions and circumstances that have built up this set of behaviors that are problematic for public safety. And so I guess I feel like the culture change is the real important thing about the opportunity for this new entity, is to guide a culture that is focused on something like human resource recovery and public safety. We're protecting people from behaviors that are dangerous to the public welfare, but we're also trying to recover as many humans back into the community as we can, as quickly and easily and successfully as we can at every step of the way, adults as well as children. So a single entity that shares that cultural objective of preserving safety and recovering people's liberty and reintegrating them as valued members of the community is important mediator for the work of those two systems, or otherwise they're going to skew in different directions, I feel.
Thank you. Rep. Weissman, and then Chair Kane.
Thank you. If I appreciate Ms. Holland's terminology of sort of overseeing I might adopt that for now versus gatekeeping. If we have one central anything that is gatekeeping, I think that's a fatal flaw. To me, the idea of sort of what's up here is an answer to the question, well, who's going to decide what the task force needs to be, or task forces, maybe a couple of them at the same time, need to be right now. Some entity needs to grapple with that decision. To me, that ought to be legislatively driven, and then again, step back. Maybe analogy helps. I had the interesting experience of stepping into chairing this tax committee that I keep talking about, having not been particularly close to the bill 2 years ago that set it up. That was by a member who was no longer part of the institution. There's a 6-member committee of legislators and a supportive task force, which is 15, 17 or so experts, public sector, private, all over. We direct the task force with a fair bit of broad scope and discretion to go and study something and bring back reports to us. Example, look at the question whether Colorado should shift from being a taxable income-based state to a AGI base state with an eye to revenue positivity, negativity, neutrality, and efficiency of the system and taxpayer equity considerations. You know a bit about tax, that's a gigantically broad question. So we didn't know what we were going to get back. We got back a report, and frankly, that's it. We weren't there to vote yes or no on anything. It was, all right, experts, we have given you broad charge and some time, and we're trusting in your discretion, and we are then going to chew on what comes back. In that instance, there's not necessarily legislation in response because it's a kind of a brutal subject, and the findings reported that. In other charges, there might in fact be legislation. Critically there is bill drafting in the committee, but there's actually not bill drafting sort of at the task force level. We have this concept that from TCJJ, we have the subcommittee or the work group or the task force, they do their thing, they recommend text, it passes up through the full TCJJ, and then, we're 80% of the way to this place doing a bill. I started out, and whenever we began these meetings, October, November, thinking that that was the right model. I'm no longer sure I think that that is the right model. Rather, different analogy. Some folks here will remember SB 22057. Subject was brain injuries. What the legislation ended up doing is pull together a task force to go look at the question deeply, come back with a report. They did. It's 25 pages. It's not a bill draft, but it points pretty clearly in the direction of what legislation should look like after months of consideration by people deeply in the space from many different angles and with a lot of listening. That might be kind of the right model. In that instance, the legislature said, hey, task force, go look at supporting survivors of brain injuries. We need a concept or a construct that's not the full General Assembly, but rather is a something else to kick things off and then let it go from there. With all that said, overseeing or instantiating to me is a lot closer to where we need to be than gatekeeping. Final thought that I've had just sitting here now with respect to adult versus juvenile. I don't know, maybe we don't have one overseer, maybe we have two, one adult, one juvenile. They do their task force thing. In terms of how that distinction is resolved in this place, just by matter of bill assignment, if it is an adult justice system bill, basically 100% of the time, it's in the Judiciary Committee. If it is a youth justice system bill, taking a broader concept of what that means, frankly, most often it is in Judiciary, but sometimes they're in public health. Sometimes there are things that are in the education committees that we would recognize, at least broadly, are within what all we're talking about here, school to prison pipeline issues. Just looking at that kind of difference in where bills get routed, I think is illustrative of who might need to be in the overseer group for each. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
As I process this, I think I agree with Jason. I think there should be two different groups and the oversight, this overarching group. It'll be too hard for me to figure out who should serve on that to do justice to the juvenile issues. And so I think there should be two separate groups, and we can make a recommendation how they intersect or how that intermediary works. Because I think, because I do think their scope will be schools and suspension from schools and, what happens there. I think it will be about trauma, probably more than what the adult side will be. And I just think they might need to have their own space because they will talk more about prevention and interventions than probably the adult group will talk about, because there are so many more broken things. In my view, there are so many more broken things in the adult system that we need to transform. And I think we have some pretty good basis for things in the juvenile system because it has a different statutory mandate towards a rehabilitation and not necessarily a punishment piece. So that's kind of where I am now.
Yeah, I disagree. I recognize these are two very different worlds, but they are not mutually exclusive, and they do interact. And I fear that without some, and I don't need a power role for this overarching umbrella or captain agency, but I think it should be there for those instances where we need to force the collaboration of those two worlds. And just having an intermediary, I'm not super optimistic about that, whoever gets that role, as opposed to a carefully crafted captain agency. And I recognize, Maureen, that it would be difficult to identify who would be on that. I don't think it should be a group of 15, 20, 25 people. I think it should be much, much smaller. And I do think it should be limited in their ability to thwart any effort of either of these two groups. But I think there's a value in having it. And that's just kind of where I land.
Tom, can I probe on that a little bit? What might that, and I'll open it up to the group, what might that look like? Would that be 5 people completely independent of those two bodies? Might it be 9 with 3 from each and 3 independent? What's the way to drive?
No, you kind of just hit my number in my mind. It was 9. And how to land it with 3 from the juvenile world, 3 from the adult world, and then 3 from, I don't know. I don't know where the other 3 come from.
But that's a good question. Do the oversight people also serve on the adult side and the juvenile side? So they come from within?
Yeah, I think
those two groups.
I think you could have 3 representatives from the juvenile group, 3 from the adult group, and then 3 we figure out who those other people should be. And I don't know if that's the place for a lived experience person. I don't know. But I still see value in that.
Yeah.
And I see Matt's hand over here, and then I want to get anybody else, just your reactions on this coordinating entity and shared membership.
Yeah, what I would just add is I think the benefit of having this central kind of overseeing entity, I'm kind of more where Tom's at on this. I do see a value in that. I see a value of shared membership in that oversight. And I think to address Jason and Maureen's concerns, you could fix that in the voting structure as it relates to passing on recommendations that come out of the individual committees. But I think there is real value in having that central group because it allows you to take the long view and take a holistic approach to some of these issues. And like Director Hilke said earlier, these changes take time in coordination. And I think that central agency can be tasked with taking a little bit longer view on these things. And provide that guidance. And there is significant overlap. I mean, you could take a retrospective look at the people who are currently in the adult system to understand what likely challenges they faced when they were juveniles so that you can be more informed about addressing those issues for our youth moving forward. And so that, as a non-voting member, but I've got a name on a placard, so I felt like making a comment. That's what I would offer.
I got a rebuttal. Is it my turn to speak next?
Jump in. We're less formal. Yes.
And I respect, and this is great debate. I'll go home and think about this all day. But I worry about time. And the matters of today are all caused because of yesterday. And I think about time, and I worry that having this overarching group will force time to go on and on and on. And I think that if what we are, I think the liberation will be delayed, and ultimately we'll end up, uh, you know, this thing will drone on and on and on and on. When in actuality, if the experts that are in the adult system know what needs to happen, and they've been knowing it for the last 25 years or 100 years, do it. If the juvenile justice that has been through many different metamorphoses in probably just the last 5 years, they've seen the trends and issues, they know what needs to happen, make the changes. And I just don't want the juvenile people stepping into the adult lane and speaking for potential noteworthy policy that should happen when actually they have no experience in that. In the same vein with regard to the adult system. So it's kind of like this. So that's where I'm coming from. Not, and I think that I worry that if we have this overarching group, things will slow down tremendously. And I mean, I heard the comment about things take time, but it doesn't have to take time. I was in the marching band. A whole note, if you put it in half time, it turns into a half note. So let's just do cut time music and make it happen as expeditious as possible.
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to go to Director Hilke, who raised his hand. And I want folks to continue thinking on that question of, is there a defined role that body could play without being an inhibitor to action, as a limited role of coordination or identifying outside topics that doesn't interfere with the autonomy or the progress there? But Director Hilke, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to take a page out of Rep. Wiseman's book and try to make this a little bit more complex. One of the things I'm starting to hear, particularly on the juvenile side, is sort of two different paths. One path would be for a juvenile side to do upstream work before people get justice involved, like working on truancy, working on trauma-informed treatment, doing things and making recommendations and public policy recommendations about keeping people from becoming justice system involved. And in that case, I see a good deal of need for autonomy from an oversight group. But when you have that group working on people who have been charged with a crime, there is overlap. There are still victims and I'm talking about the cases where there's violence and wreckage and carnage that, is the awful kind that we're talking about. That's happening to those victims and those survivors and the people in the system, whether or not the actor was under 18 or over 18. And so in my view, there has to be some sort of bridge of that gap to represent all interests within the system, because even though we want to treat juveniles in a different way and we don't want to do something and put them through a system that creates a person who's more likely to commit crime in the future, which can happen with adults too, as you know, we still have to think about the interests of those people who have been victimized and the system itself, and there has to be some coordination. So I don't think I'm adding any solutions, but pointing out a little bit of a challenge is that there are times where maybe no oversight is needed, particularly on upstream work, and sometimes where it's going to need to be needed. Thanks.
Thank you, Director. Anybody else? Janet, please jump in.
Thank you. I love this conversation, and I think what I'm hearing, particularly from Jason's comments, is there's some tension between getting the right amount of stakeholder input and community engagement with efficiency and innovation. And I'm not sure what the resolution for that is, but there are different perspectives here. And to take Stan's comments and just pull the thread a bit, I think there could even be a fourth option, that there's a group that you could have an overarching group with 3 pillars underneath, or you could just have 3 pillars standing alone. But the pillars would be juveniles who are not system involved yet with a focus on prevention, juveniles who are charged, and adults who are charged. And then you can plug into that the various components of, are we looking at services for those incarcerated? Are we looking for reentry? Are we looking to address recidivism? Or are we looking straight at prevention? And how do those things interact with each other? Unicorn.
Thank you. And Senator, I don't think we've heard from you in a bit on this. I want to draw you in on this conversation about one entity, 2 entities, a coordinating council. What are your thoughts on the fundamental structure to address this?
I don't think there's maybe a magic solution about 1 versus 2, but I've heard people talk, colleagues here talk about the need to have some coordination. So I think the trick, if you will, is how to have criminal and juvenile experts and stakeholders, perhaps in 2 different groups, but not devoid of some coordination or counsel, as you say. The reality is, a few years ago, we had a short-term juvenile justice reform commission that had a single mission, a single set of things that we were doing. We proposed the legislation, it passed. The Juvenile Justice Reform Commission went away, and on we went. But it did seem, having served on both at the same time, that there were different things and different people, but not wholly different people, because frankly, another senator and I were on both, and we saw some of the same people and some of the same, in fact, almost all of the same organization, and from criminal and juvenile. So I don't think there's a magic formula for that. Just think that saying, well, there's this one and there's this one, and they don't have anything to do with each other, and they don't talk, and all that. We don't need silence. I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear, but that's it.
Representative.
Thank you. You know, I'm really struggling with sort of the right metaphor for the overseer. I do think that what Senator Gardner said earlier is right. I mean, the ultimate endpoint here is proposing good policy. If the concern is what's the final coordinating process, I don't know. Let me suggest that is bicameralism and presentment. That is 100 legislators, and that is the governor ultimately. Whether we architect something or things that is going to say, here's a draft bill, now just go. Or, you know, here is something closer to what you are preparing for us. Here is a summation of witness testimony, and maybe by analogy to the brain injury process, here's a 25-page report that is strongly indicative of where legislation should go, but is not draft text. At any rate, that goes through this process, and the governor, which is to say, it goes through people that the voters of the state have elected to make the final call. So maybe we don't need to overthink it past that. With that, sort of here's the metaphor for the overseer. And I think I don't know, a run is better than a race, but that's not great either. What we want is supported, scoped, thoughtful, broad, frankly, listening to communities around the state. There should be staff support in case research questions come up. There should be probably facilitation support of the sort that you are performing. Somebody's going to chair and vice chair each of these task forces. There would need to be a mechanism for that. But I keep coming back to this question of like, who gets that going. It's kind of like firing the starting gun for the run or the race. One person is scoped, or in this case, one entity is scoped to do that. And which is to say here, what starting guns are we going to fire? Because we're not going to have 15 task forces at once, although we well could. What, 1 or 2 or 3 are going in at any one point? Somebody has to make that call. But then you make the call, you fire the starting gun, and then you're done. Step back. The group goes and does its thing, and there is the input, and that is put forth to the whole General Assembly to support legislation.
Thank you, Representative. And you know, I think we're working with the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Council, and they had that same thing that they had created. I think it was 6 subcommittees, and at their strategic retreat, they looked and they said, well, these 2 got a lot done. These other 4, it was more than a body could take on. We are at the point where we've got about 10 minutes, and I'm not going to try to take us down a path of the next big operational thing. What I will forewarn is I will probably be reaching out to you, or Carrie will, asking for some online input. And I think we're going to have to start gathering your thinking online on topics like where this is housed. And I will tell you, I'm probably not going to ask you to vote this is right, this is wrong, but we'll probably do something where we ask you to offer input into what are the strengths, the implications, or the considerations of it being housed differently, so that we can bring you back some summary of your colleagues' thinking of the strengths and the challenges with these different situational settings. Before I go into what's going forward, I do want to just hand it back over to the chairs to address anything they would like to.
No, I just wanted to follow through because we've trickled into where it's housed and discussions. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this because, you know, it's where will we get the most support? And my experience with some of the legislative committees is not as positive as reported by some of the some of the witnesses. You know, I worry less about where it's housed than the fundamental question that Representative Weissman said. How is the decision made on what the work subject matters are? Because we don't want it controlled by the executive or the legislative. We want it driven, we want input, but we want it driven by an independent group that values this area of policy. So in some ways, it's all about independence and not housing. And if it's housed somewhere and the legislature, or it's housed in the legislature and they make all the decisions, I'm not sure I can like go there, because, you know, 5 years from now, I won't agree with anything that some political party might, well, you know, I mean, I think we have to be forward thinking. And I tried to look at independent groups, you know, people, you know, like the parole board is housed in the executive branch, but they're independent, right? They are not controlled by the executive. So I'm just throwing that out as we start to get to that issue, to think about that rather than thinking where it's housed will control it.
I'm 100% on the same page with Maureen.
And I think we may tease out then in soliciting some input from everybody, more what are the critical things to success? Like what support does it need? What autonomy does it need? What input does it need? Because it seems to me that with the right lawyers in the room and council drafters, we can structure it to exist in multiple places as long as it's got the protections that you all are talking about. In a truly lightning round, does anybody want to offer any closing reflections on this, knowing that I may reach for the mute button? Yeah. Any just closing reflection, and not necessary, but I've got a few minutes, so I want to offer it if people have thoughts that they think are important for people to consider as we wrap up. It's also possible it's Friday afternoon. Debbie, please.
I had a little angst when Tom was talking about 3 from this group and 3 from this group, and then 3, I don't know where. Victims, survivors, and lived experienced folks need to be included. don't exclude us.
Appreciate that. We are going to go in just a few minutes to public comment if we have, because I want to keep that commitment given it's on the agenda. I do want to name, we've got a short timeline to continue getting a lot of work done. What we are probably going to be asking you guys to do is both provide us some input digitally as well as react to some things. We're going to have to work with your chairs and synthesize what we're hearing and try to provide things for the group to react to. We simply don't have the time for drafting by committee. We do have a next meeting scheduled for the 19th. It sounds like we will not be back at the Carr building, but we will update you if all the repairs and water damage are dealt with there. We are tentatively looking if we needed an additional meeting. We also need to deal with a scheduling snafu on our February meeting. We have been tentatively scheduled for February 2nd. Unfortunately, our team has to be out of town with the Wildfire Mitigation Code Board. Tom has some obligations this month. So we thought rather than doing a very complicated doodle poll, we'd capitalize on having everybody here together and see what days or times might work. Either looking at Monday, February 5th, or the preceding week, January 29th through 1st. I know we had tried to go with Fridays. It seems that's going to be a struggle for the February. And I wanted to see if I could get by show of, or just raising of hand and letting me know, are there dates that are possible or absolute no's for folks?
I am in DC the 29th through the 1st, but the week of the 5th is pretty good.
Any Tuesday or Wednesday is out for me because that's when House Judiciary meets.
How are Mondays? Starting our groups together.
Mornings? You do Monday?
Risky PM.
Could people do Monday, February 5th?
When, Mike?
Afternoon.
Afternoon?
We're on the,
And I know it's yeah, particularly on Mondays.
like
3?
could be earlier. I mean, I don't, sorry to be speaking with that recognition. I mean, typically we're off the floor by 1:30, and that's probably conservative that early in session, but you know, I at this point, I could probably commit to Monday, 2-5, 1:30.
Okay. Is that a problem for anyone?
I don't, what day is Senate Judiciary going to meet? Do we know?
I think their afternoon is Wednesday.
Okay.
Let's tentative that and we'll follow up with everybody
should work.
on that. I appreciate the flexibility.
Right, Monday, the 5th should work.
Are we 1:30 or 2, Representative? What?
1:30.
1:30.
1:30. And then I understand that the majority will be providing happy hour. I am going to pause. We're at 12:43. I want to look.
Can we,
Yes, sir.
I'm kind of with Representative Weissman. I don't know that we're going to accomplish this in 2 meetings. I'd like to put a third one on the books just in case.
So we had been tentatively looking at the 22nd, but Tom, I know you've got some obligations this month.
Oh, January?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, it have to be
February,
after the 5th.
after the 5th. Yeah.
Can we look at that following week, looking February 14, 15, 16? That's a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday,
Wednesday's a no.
not 16.
It's bad.
What about that Monday?
The 12th?
We-
You do that?
We said the 16th was out.
That Thursday might work.
15th for an afternoon?
1:30.
Did we, Senate Judiciary, we think is Wednesday afternoons this session?
Yeah, I think Monday and Wednesday, but as early as the 5th. And I don't know, Tom and Maureen might have a better sense of what SJC.
Let's pencil in the 15th.
Pencil in the 15th in the afternoon. Do I have any significant concerns there?
Your Judiciary Committee meets Thursday, I can say that much.
Can I find a way to work with you offline to get input? I'm nervous given our deadline about pushing it beyond that.
Would that meeting on the 15th be in the afternoon?
Yes, it would be.
Okay,
Director, does that work for you?
I'll make it work.
We appreciate it. My apologies on multiple fronts. I appreciate that. Do we have any members of the public? We are at 12:44. I want to make sure if you would like to address this committee, you have the opportunity to do so. If you would raise your hand or shoot a message in chat, we will get you up on screen here. I am seeing none. So I believe we have our January 19 meeting set. We have rescheduled our other two meetings. We will get a memo out. I'm not going to send it to you on a Friday afternoon because I know nobody will read it. I will send it out on Monday. Rep Weissman will. I want to open it to the floor for any closing questions or thoughts before I ask the chairs to close this out. Yes, Victoria.
And more of just a reminder announcement. I know we were scheduling this over the holiday. So on Monday at 9 a.m. from 9 to 11, we have the site visit to Project Elevate scheduled with the director who came to testify, Cassandra Harris, and her team. The first hour will be meeting with some of their clients, staff, and then we also have a tour of the facility. It's a transitional housing facility scheduled. It's the address is in the appointment. It's on Kearney Street. So if anybody's available and interested, feel free to join us on Monday.
Thank you for the reminder and thank you for coordinating that for us. With that, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I don't have anything else except to thank you. I think this was a super high level discussion of important issues. So I appreciate that. And we will let you know if we're going to meet back here in the Capitol or if Ralph Carr becomes alive on any level since the flooding there. So I'll let you know. That I think we can be done.
Thank you all.